Hello, everyone. Thank you for tuning in. In celebration of what would have been David Bowie's 78th birthday on January 8th, 2025, we are going to endeavor to discuss and rank his amazing body of work. In part one, we'll be focusing on the albums individually ranked 29 through 11, and in part two, will be our top 10 along with our favorite 10 non-album tracks. Please keep an eye out for the link to part two in this video's description. And I also encourage you to check out our past rankings, which have included bands like The Cure, Nine Inch Nails, Jesus and Mary Chain, Slowdive, Bauhaus, Smashing Pumpkins, Cocteau Twins, Dead Can Dance, Smiths, Depeche Mode, and loads of others. I myself had done a David Bowie ranking video way over 10 years ago, and it may have been the first ever ranking video that I did. With me today, we have Frank Deserto. New York City musician, DJ, and writer. His writing credits include postpunk.com, music blog Systems of Romance, former resident of Weird Records, and member of the bands Funeral Crashers, Rebel Hotel, Dream Affair, Frank Just Frank, The Chameleons, and a current member of The Harrow. Be sure to check out the Harrow's new EP, Cinderglow. Frank also is the curator of Cherry Red collections such as No Songs Tomorrow and Cherry Stars Collide. Thank you, as always, Frank, for joining us.
Always a pleasure.
Next, we have Greg Fossolino, co-author of the Trouser Press Record Guide and the Trouser Press Guide to 90s Rock. Greg was a former editor of Reflex and Faces magazine, has written for Cream, Fangoria, The Big Takeover, and Guitar for the Practicing Musician, among others. Former member of The Naked and the Dead, Bell Hollow, and currently also a member of The Harrow. Greg is a musical archivist featuring a YouTube channel filled with loads of content, concerts, rare recordings, and interviews. Thank you for joining us, Greg.
Thank you, Brett, as
And for you
always.
guys, and for you guys watching, we will have links for everyone below, so you can check out everyone's projects. If you're new to the channel, my name is Brett, singer and bass player of the band Audra. Have toured and recorded with artists Black Tape for a Blue Girl and Unto Ashes. Have had the fortune of sharing the stage opening for some great artists over the years, like New Model Army, AFI, The Mission, Peter Murphy, Jeanette Napolitano of Concrete Blonde, ambient legend Steve Roach, and many more. As always, before we start our ranking, we will be doing a few rounds of trivia related to David Bowie. Rules are goes to the person. If they get it correct, 2 points. If they miss, it goes to the next person, and they're able to get 1 point if they get it correct. The winner will get to choose the order that we will be ranking in, and we will start things off with Greg for question number one. All
All
right.
right.
After the Ziggy Stardust tour ended, Bowie would head to France to record an album of cover songs, which resulted in the Pinups album. Only two-thirds of the members of his band, the Spiders from Mars, would appear on the album. Who was missing and who was their replacement?
Trevor Boulder. Is he
That is
missing one?
incorrect. That is incorrect. Over to you, Frank.
So I think it's Woody that didn't make it. Oh goodness, but who drummed in his place? That's the trick, right? That's
Yeah.
what you want for another one. Oh my God. I knew this at some point, but I didn't brush up on it. So I don't remember, but I know it was Woody otherwise. Woody Woodmansey.
Ansley Dunbar.
Okay, never would have gotten that.
All right. Over to you, Frank, for question number two. All right. In 1972, which was a huge year for David Bowie, he
Mhm.
released Ziggy Stardust and recorded the majority of the Aladdin Sane album. He also produced two albums released that year, contributing to the songwriting and performances as well, and produced for another artist that would be released 2 months into 1973. Name those three albums.
Okay, so then we have the two of them are right here. Two is Transformer by Lou Reed, and the other one is Iggy and the Stooges, Raw Power. And the other album is Mott the Hooples, All the Young Dudes, which he also wrote the title track for.
2 points for you, Frank. All right. Round one ends with Frank 2, Greg 0. Back over to you, Greg. My first exposure to this blues guitarist was in the summer of 1987 when I went to see Adventures in Babysitting in the movie theater. where he famously said to Elizabeth Shue and company, "Nobody leaves this place without singing the blues." In the prior year, this master of the Telecaster made a guest appearance on lead guitar for Bowie's Underground on the Labyrinth soundtrack.
Well, it can't be Stevie Ray Vaughan because it's only the name I associate with blues and Bowie in the 80s. I'm gonna pass.
Over to you, Frank. Any guess?
The worst part is I'm picturing him because he played it in one of those alumni things. He's Charlie Sexton. The Charlie Sexton?
No.
Oh,
Albert Collins.
oh man.
Wow. Okay.
All right. Did you guys see Adventures in Babysitting?
Not in
Did
not,
not.
not in, it's been a long time.
Okay, here we go. Back over to you, Frank. Here's an easy one. Of the three albums included in the so-called Berlin trilogy, only this one was fully recorded in Berlin.
Gross.
2 points for you, Frank. All right, so at the end of round two, Frank 4, Greg 0. And here we go with the final round. Over to you, Greg. All right. Space and celestial bodies have been a constant presence in Bowie's work. Minus tracks from the Ziggy Stardust album, name 5 Bowie songs that have a word associated with outer space in their titles, but do not include any cover songs.
Hmm. Okay. Hello, Space Boy is one. Sunday doesn't count. Let's see. Gemini space. I took a ride on a Gemini spacecraft.
Isn't
Right.
that a cover song?
Oh, that is a cover song. Yeah, you're right. I should have this. Okay. Give me 1 second. I'm drawing a blank. Frank's gonna get this, so I'm gonna let him. I'm gonna let him take it.
You can, I'm gonna try. So Hello Space Boy. Okay. Hello Space Boy. Fall Dog bombs the moon from reality. All my things prepared myself for this, but I don't I'm just blanking as well though. But hang on. I'm just for the interest of time, I'm gonna pass as well. I feel like I should have more of these in my back pocket.
You guys missed the low-hanging fruit with Space Oddity,
Uh,
Life on Mars, The Prettiest Star, Baby Universal,
oh
Shining
yeah.
Star, Looking for Satellites, Heaven's in Here, Blackstar, New Killer Star, The Stars Are Out Tonight, Dancing Out in Space, Planet of Dreams, Born in a UFO, South Horizon, Like a Rocket Man we could throw in there as well. All right, so no points on that one.
What can I
Back
say?
over.
Gotta practice more. Gotta practice more.
Yes, yes. We'll do a retest in a year. All right. Back over to you, Frank. We can't just focus our questions on the music of David Bowie, as he had significant roles in theater as well as in feature films. David Bowie portrays Andy Warhol in this 1996 Julian Schnabel film.
Basquiat.
That is correct for 2 points. So that puts Frank in the win at 6, but let's throw a bonus one out just for fun. Okay. Please listen closely. Bowie worked with some amazing guitarists throughout his career. Besides the obvious ones, Mick Ronson, Carlos Alomar, Adrian Blue, Robert Fripp, and Reeves Gabrels, name 5 others that were either in the live band or on studio recordings.
Who does this
Let's
go?
go with Greg first.
Earl Slick,
All right.
Peter Frampton.
All right.
What's his name? The guy who did the crazy guitar and Ashes to Ashes. I can't think of his name offhand. And Armstrong. I can't think of his first name.
Kevin Armstrong, you got
Emmett
it.
Armstrong. Yeah. Well, technically, Brian May, if you're counting Under Pressure.
Oh, wow. Good one.
Oh,
Really good one. I missed that one on my list. Yeah.
And who else?
One more.
I can't think of a fifth one. Frank?
I mean,
Greg.
you were gonna really gonna pass? Look on the board, man.
Come on, Greg, you got this. You've already talked about a couple in the previous questions when you were
And I gave you one.
Um,
look over
shoot.
look over Frank's left shoulder there.
Ah.
He's your
Oh,
favorite
Mark.
musician of all time.
Mark Bullen. All right, Frank, just for fun, can you name five?
Yeah, for fun. Okay, David Torn. We have Pete Townsend did something, right?
Yeah.
Paige Hamilton,
Yep.
Lenny Kravitz, Ricky
Yeah.
Gardner from on Low.
You got it.
Stevie Ray Vaughan was the one. I mean, I want to keep going. Stacey Hayden.
Yeah, you got it, man.
um,
Albert Collins.
John Hutch from the early
Yeah.
days, right?
Yeah.
Anyway, cool.
Yep.
Yeah,
Jerry
great.
Leonard,
Yes,
Chris
Jerry Leonard.
Haskett, even Dave Grohl, Nile Rodgers, John Lennon, I think played.
Oh yeah.
So, anyways, Frank, you were the winner of the trivia. So, do you go ahead and pick your order?
I'd actually love if Greg kicked us off.
All right. So we are going to go with we'll go Greg, Frank, and then myself. Does that sound good?
Yes.
Sounds
All
good to
right.
me.
All right. And then just to be crystal clear, in the intro I mentioned we're doing 29 albums. I just want to clarify. We are including the two Tin Machine studio albums. We're going to include the official Toy album, the Buddha of Suburbia, of course. We are not including EPs, live albums, compilations, and the tracks from Labyrinth that were Bowie's will be considered for the non-album part of this video. Uh, Greg is going to kick us off with number 29.
All right, number 29. 1987's Never Let Me Down. I really do. I mean, as much as I adore Bowie, I really do kind of hate this album. And listening again to it kind of made me a little angry and impatient to get through it. I feel it's kind of monotonous. It's boring. It's really his most white bread AOR album. And worst of all, it's his most conventional album. And in my opinion, conventional is the one thing that David Bowie should never be. He also didn't like the album, so I feel like I'm justified in putting it here. Um, I'm not really crazy about the Bang Bang cover by Iggy on it. I feel like he went to the Iggy cover well one too many times, and it's just not particularly good. As far as guitar, I mean, I always love hearing great guitarists with Bowie, and Peter Frampton did have his moment with Frampton Comes Alive, which I do have somewhere in my collection here, as everyone else does my age. But Frampton's guitar work on this album is pretty mediocre, I feel. I first saw him on this tour when I was in my 20s, and I was a big fan. I was really disappointed because it was similarly the tour I felt was a little bit too mainstream, too conventional, and I still don't have great associations with the album, so that's why I'm putting it at last. So Never Let Me Down.
And just to mention to the viewers, as always, we mention our three favorite songs from each of these releases, third favorite, second favorite, first, and those will be culminated in individual playlists as well in the description. So, Greg, your top three from Never Let Me.
There's not that many songs I really like on here, so it was a little tough. But I would say number 3, Time Will Crawl. Number 2, the title track. And the one song I actually do like on here, which I'm picking first, is Glass Spider, because at least it's different and it's got that really cool fantasy theatrical element. Reminds me a bit of the Future Legend intro on Diamond Dogs, and I actually really do think that's a cool track. But yeah, not the rest.
All right, Frank, you're number 29.
All right, my number 29, Brett, is going to break your heart. It is David Bowie's 1967 album on Duram, produced by Mike Vernon. So really, can't really hang with this record. It's kind of an easy no-brainer for the bottom for me. I like the Manish Boys stuff and the King Bees and all his like old R&B stuff, but this album with its Anthony Newley-ish vibe and swinging 60s thing doesn't really do it for me. I kind of would rather listen to Cilla Black or the Walker Brothers or something like that if I'm going to live in this world. And really, there's only a couple tracks I can really hang with on this one. Finding three was really hard. What I want to say, though, is I'm really glad that he had a lot of opportunity to grow past this record and experiment and find his footing, because I can't imagine a world that this is the only David Bowie album that exists. What I also dislike about this record is that I've been tricked into listening or buying this material so many times with like, this images collection or these, don't be fooled by the name comps. There's just so much of these things flying around, and it really is just trying to capitalize on stuff. And really, and then also another thing is two of the best singles from this era being "Let Me Sleep Beside You" and "In the Heat of the Morning" are not on the actual record, which would elevate it for me. So why he left those two tracks to be obscurities until these collections came out is beside me. I don't really understand why. But anyway, so for my top three though, number three is "There's a Happy Land," which I could not sing to you right now if I wanted to, but I did like it enough to put it at number three. Number two is "Silly Boy Blue," which is really pretty, soaring. But I do prefer it on Toy, which we'll talk about later. And number one is "When I Live My Dream," though, which is the clear highlight and a really sweet chamber pop song. So 1967's debut for my bottom pick. Sorry, Brett.
You're killing me, Frank. All right.
Uh,
All right, number 29 for me. This is really the only David Bowie album that I've never really been able to connect with. And it's the era of the headless Steinberger guitars. And that is the debut Tin Machine album from 1989. It opens with Heaven's in Here, which for me was kind of a poor opening song choice. 6 minutes of kind of repetitive blues rock. Um, I don't really care for anything until track five, I Can't Read, for which I've come to enjoy because of the stripped down version that was released, years later. But yeah, Tin Machine number one. My three favorite tracks on this one. I'm gonna go with "Baby Can Dance," the closing track, which is a catchy little number. "Bus Stop," and then my favorite on this one is "I Can't Read." But clearly, the clear number 29 choice for me, Tin Machine. Greg, 28.
All right. I'm going to echo Frank here in much of what he said about the DRAM 1967 debut album, which, sorry to say, I find most of it rather cringeworthy. His voice is just too Anthony Newley-ish. The arrangements I find sort of trite and unappealing. I do, really can enjoy British Edwardian music hall style pop when it's done well, like late '60s Kinks or some of the Paul McCartney material from that era. But this doesn't have that like sweet magic of like Ray Davies, for example. It just sounds kind of goofy to me. Some of the tracks I find sort of embarrassing. Uncle Arthur, Please Mr. Gravedigger, Join the Gang. I mean, the one saving grace of that is it doesn't have the laughing gnome, thank gosh. There's a lot of like moments that I find sort of cringy, like where there's one moment where he says like "Achtung," and "We Are Hungry Men" in its totality is, no. I feel like the simpler, less contrived songs on this are the best ones. But like Frank said, I feel like the earlier rock singles, beat music singles are a lot more fun to listen to, and the later stuff is obviously so much better. So it's kind of an anomaly in his catalog. As far as three songs, I'm gonna go with number three, When I Live My Dream." Number two, because these three songs I actually do like, "Love You Till Tuesday," which is really pretty, and my favorite is "Come and Buy My Toys." So David Bowie at number 28.
Right, Frank, 28.
Ha ha ha. He. My number 28 is "Low." Ha ha ha. No, just kidding. Really, it's going to be "The Next Day." It's also a similarly spicy choice. "The Next Day" from 2013, his supposed comeback record. I want to love this record so much. I truly do. I've never been blown away by it, and there's some really nice tracks. A lot of them were left. A lot of the best ones were left off of it. That were collected on the "Next Day" extra EP. And but I find most of this record to be kind of boring blues butt rock, a little over reliant on those tropes, a little been there, done that. I feel like he threw every single collaborator and sound he could possibly throw on with this record. And there's some interesting sonic flair, but I kind of find it just to be kind of a hot mess of a record. It also really bugs me that this record continues to be like the best record since Scary Monsters, which as a lifelong Bowie fan, even through those hard 90s years that some people love, some people don't, we'll see where they rank them later. We all rank them. But it was maddening that how much praise was thrown for this record just because he went away for 10 years. And it bugged me, and I've never really been able to warm up to this record. I of course, when this first single came out, was it "Where Are We Now?" It was a really lovely comeback in that way, but then the rest of the record sounds nothing like it. So anyway, my three favorite tracks off this one. Number three would be Heat, which is a closing track, which is really eerie, kind of those latter day Scott Walker songs, Scott Walker being a massive influence on Bowie. But I prefer other songs he's done in that vein, though. That being said, my second favorite is Where Are We Now, which I have warmed up to a lot, and I find a lot of disjointed beauty to it. And my favorite is Love Is Lost, which I find to be just a cracking track, really intense and powerful. I actually prefer the studio version to the remix. I know a lot of people love that LCD Sound System remix, but I actually love the studio version of it. So the next day, controversial pick, number 28 for me.
Okay, number 28 for me. I'm going to go back to 1973 for Pinups. So this was Bowie's transitional covers album, bridging the Ziggy era to what would come next in the mid 70s. Uh, they're excellent versions, but a lot of the source material is just not in my wheelhouse. However, the highs are just totally splendid. Um, came to know this album through the Ryko CD reissue that came out back in 1990, and there were bonus tracks on that one, and those two of the bonus tracks on that one would be amongst my favorites, and that's Jacques Brel's Port of Amsterdam or Amsterdam, and then the version Bruce Springsteen's version of or Bowie's version of Bruce Springsteen's Growing Up, I think is a really a great version as well. But choosing three tracks from this one, Here Comes the Night with that the vocal on that one is just adrenaline inducing. Sorrow is absolutely beautiful, but my absolute clear number one favorite on this is the version of Pink Floyd, Syd Barrett era See Emily Play, which was my first exposure to that song was through the Bowie version, which is so good. So number 28 for me is Pinups. Back to you, Greg.
All right, up to number 27. And I'm going to go with Tonight from 1984. This is in my opinion, a rushed and uninspired piece of work, which is things that Bowie himself has admitted about it. It's the middle record of what he called his Phil Collins years. It's not as bad as Never Let Me Down, but I don't think it's good either. The production on it is pretty much absolute garbage. It's everything I hate about pop 80s production on display, front and center. The synth sound is really awful and formulaic. Some of the songs, like I Keep Forgetting, just terrible. Tumble and Twirl could have been okay without the cheesy synthetic horns, the syndrome, the bad vocal trilling, and it has this what I assume is a mandolin solo that sounds like a drunken hobo. Dancing with the Big Boys is another like awful cliche 80s track. That part where there's that voice going big boys is to me one of the cringiest moments on any David Bowie record. And there's just too many covers on it. You could tell he just didn't have the material, and they're not very good. God Only Knows is one of my all-time favorite songs by the Beach Boys, but I think this is a pretty terrible cover of it. Um, Iggy does another Iggy cover from the Berlin era, Neighborhood Threat, which I think isn't bad, but it's kind of subpar. The worst is the title track, which is another Iggy era cover, which is just total cheese. I mean, we all probably could agree David was a musical god, but man, he rarely does pop reggae well. I don't think that's his forte. I mean, he's great as David Bowie, but he's not so much as a faux Bob Marley. And on that one, it's like, whoo. The best thing about this album for me is that the royalties kept Iggy Pop alive to make some great later records and reform the Stooges. Aside from the one brilliant track, Loving the Alien, I can still see why I hated the album then, and I still kind of hate it now. So not a fan. As far as three songs, number three, Blue Jean, which is, a formulaic Bowie rocker, but it could have been better if but the production kind of kills it all for me. I feel like it could have been good. Number two, Don't Look Down, which is the only, in my opinion, passable Iggy cover here, but I'm still not sure why he did a reggae version of it. And then the sole bright spot, as I said, is Loving the Alien, which is slinky and moody. Reminds me a little of some of the, sort of new wave post punk stuff going on at the time, like China Crisis and Comset Angels. I think it's an awesome song, but not so much the rest of the album. So number 27, Tonight.
Greg came out swinging.
Tell
Wow.
us how you really feel, man.
What can I say?
Bad.
Brings back bad memories.
Yeah.
All right, Frank, over to you.
I don't know. I gotta take a second. Anyway, 27, right? So I'm gonna go with Tin Machine's debut record from 1989. And I've never really warmed up to this record. It was one of the last Bowie records I ever got. I find it really tasteless, over the top, very crass. I mean, the same man who brought you philosophical lyrics and deep musings and cut up techniques and really great stuff also brought you a-holes with buttholes for brains. Let's let that sink in for a second. But I'm glad this record got Bowie's creative juices flowing after the records that Craig has already trashed. So it helped get him out of that ditch. And the only reason this really ranks above the last two, though, is because I really didn't struggle to pick three songs on it. There's a few nice gems on this, but in the end, I found the album to be a little too long. I'm exhausted by it. For everything being kind of like 2 minutes, it sure is a long record. So long that one of my favorite tracks is not on the LP I discovered. I was DJing the other day, and I wanted to play it for the first time. And I'm like, wait, it's not even on here. Anyway, but my favorite tracks on this one are Prisoner of Love at number 3. Number 2, and this is a song that's deleted from it, Run, which I was a total slip of a song, but I loved it, and I still continue to have it. It's growing on me. And number 1 is I Can't Read, which is a little flawed on this recording, but it's one of the project's best tracks, and he knew it, which is why it got re-recorded later, which I'm going to talk about in its somber, more acoustic form a little later on in our next video. And it serves the song much better, but still a great track. Tin Machine on the whole, the first record, not so much.
All right, number 27 for me. I'm going to go with 1999's Hours. A bit of a disappointment when this came out. I think the outtakes and B-sides from this era really showed promise at a different, more darker direction. Um, I do really love the track Thursday's Child, but it's kind of indicative of the sound of the record where and it's a great opening track, but the backing vocals push it into adult contemporary territory for me. And Mark Plotty's bass line is really tasteful, but that slinky tone just leans into adult contemporary a bit. Um, I love the instrumental Brilliant Adventure on this. It feels akin to like a Moss Garden off of Heroes, or maybe like a Crystal Japan. Pretty Things Are Going to Hell is the most upbeat rockin' track, but even that, I just not never been really that into it. And Something in the Air, I feel like could have fit in on the previous album, Earthling. But three picks on this one. New Angels of Promise is my number 3. I love the sound of his vocals on that. Seven, I think, is a beautiful track, but my absolute favorite is Survive. So for me, number 27 is the Hours album. All right, Greg, 26.
26. I'm going to piggyback off Frank here and pick the debut Tin Machine album from 1989. I hadn't listened to this record in a long, long time since I got it way back then. And on this re-listen, I liked it, but I still didn't love it, which is kind of how I felt in 1989. It's decent. It's definitely an improvement over Tonight and Never Let Me Down, but it's still kind of mediocre. Some of the music, as Frank said, is just a bit too generic rock and roll. It's way too long, as Frank also mentioned, or at least it feels way too long. For this kind of stripped down rock, it should be succinct, and it's just not. It's a very tiring listen for me overall. I feel like Reeves Gabrel's guitar is the best thing on the record. He does some really interesting work on I Can't Read, the song Frank mentioned. Hit City has a bit of Wild Thing in its DNA, and then he does a quick rip of Black Sabbath's eponymous first song on there. I just don't really come back to it very often. As far as three songs, Prisoner of Love at number 3. Number 2, I'm actually going to pick Heaven's in Here, which you're right, Brad. It is kind of generic blues rock, but I feel like it's elevated by Reeves's guitar work, and I think I'm influenced by at the time that this came out. I saw Tin Machine on TV somewhere, I can't remember what show it was, playing a live performance of that song. And it was so much better live. It was really intense. And I feel like that makes me like the song more now in retrospect. And then my favorite song on the record is Amazing, which reminds me of one of those slow early 70s Rolling Stones ballads. I really enjoy that. So, yep, number 26, Tin Machine.
All right, Frank, 26.
The Tin Machine. Anyway, 1973's Pinups is going to be my next one. We've already talked about it a little bit. On the whole, I'm really hit or miss with covers records, and I find they're fun and they're sort of throwaway. And this one is throwaway by design because, of course, it's the last hurrah for the Spiders from Mars. I do like how relentless this is. There's a lot of proto-punk energy, a lot of Fast and Furious stuff. It's almost like the tracks on here are harder than almost anything on Aladdin, Sane, or Ziggy Stardust because they are, but Psych and Garage covers, and it was pointing towards a new era. But in the end, I can tell that there's a lot of tension on it too. Obviously, Mick Ronson and the rest of the band were very upset. We talked about it in the trivia. Bowie coldly broke up the Ziggy Stardust band on stage and then brought them back for this record, which I guess for one last check, I suppose. But it can be felt. There's a lot of weird energy on this album, and truth be told, I just don't love a lot of the source material. I'm not really a garage guy. I like some of these tracks. I do like, I wish you would, like the Ugly Ducklings. I do like some of these tracks, but for the most part, it does leave me cold. I do like a lot of the experimentation that's on this record. You can see some of the glimmers of what he was going to do with Diamond Dogs and Young Americans, and of course, there's the Verispeed vocals on See 'Em Play. But on the whole, it did what it was meant to do, which was to bridge the gap, sell another record, break up the band, and move them into different territory. So for that, I can't hate it, but I also can't really love it. So my favorite tracks, number 2 is Rosalind, which is a cracking opener, a really good statement of intent. Number 2 is See 'Em Play, which again we talked about the Verispeed. I also first heard Bowie's version before I heard the Pink Floyd original, so I do have a soft spot for it. And my number 1 track is Sorrow, which is really a beautiful number, and it seems like he spent more time on this track. My B side of it also has Amsterdam, which is pretty cool, which I agree is also one of the best of the era. Anyway, pinups. There it is.
Okay. 26 for me is 2003's Reality. Yes, I know. So I was fortunate to be able to see David Bowie live 3 times, and this was the last time he toured, and I was able to see that, um, an incredible performance. In 2002, 2003, we were treated to 2-year back-to-back albums. It was like the 70s all over again for a brief moment in time. Um, but then, of course, the long hiatus would occur after that. There's some great moments on Reality, but it's here towards the bottom of my list, primarily because of the cover songs. Pablo Picasso, I've never been a real big Modern Lovers fan. Try Some By won the George Harrison cover. Not really. It's kind of one of the lesser moments for me, but the standouts are really, really great. The Loneliest Guy is my number 3 pick. Number 2, Fall Dog Bombs the Moon, which I love. And my absolute favorite one is Days. Super emotional. Top tier Bowie for me is the track Days. And the closing track on this one, just going to mention it as well. Bring Me the Disco King is outstanding as well. So, but yeah, there it sits. Number 26 for me is Reality.
Killing me there, man. Killing me.
Yeah, whew. Okay. 26 for me is the album Toy, which was recorded in 2000, released in 2021. I'm not the biggest fan of Bowie's 60s work, so this reimagining of that era's songs doesn't really interest me that much. I wouldn't say it's actually not bad. It just feels like it didn't really need to exist. On a musical level, it's a bit bland. I think you had mentioned this, Brett. Mark Plati taking over from Reeves Gabrels as the main collaborator is kind of a big step down for me in terms of innovation and interesting textures. I don't really have that much else to say about it. I just find it a kind of bland record that, in general, I don't revisit often. 3 songs. Number 3, Let Me Sleep Beside You. Number 2, Shadow Man, which is a great song, though I do prefer the earlier Ziggy era recorded version. And the one amazing song on the record is the title track for me, Toy Your Turn to Drive, which is very appealing and a real bright spot. I actually really love that track. But it doesn't feel like it almost fits with the rest of the album. So, yep, number 26. No, that was number 25, excuse me.
25, yeah.
Is Toy.
All right,
Well,
Frank, you're 25.
I'm also going to piggyback with you and go with Toy, which I have here is both a box set version and a giant 10-inch box, which is insane. This is actually a wild thing that I don't know if I've ever listened to all of. Anyway, I echo everything that Greg said. We already talked about how much I don't love a lot of the 60s material. The album's flawed on principle. Yes, it's definitely a little bland. My only excuse for it is that it wasn't meant to be released. He obviously shelved it. He was recording it after hours and between hours and Heathen. And honestly, though, if this did come out, it would have probably killed my fandom because we'll talk about hours, but I was a big fan in the 90s, so I loved Outside and Earthling and his raw, intense era. So him coming back with these like really reflective, somber, old man kind of looking back records didn't really do it for me, and it would probably killed my fandom. So I'm really glad we got Heathen instead. We'll talk about that also later. There's obviously a very nostalgic feel to this one. Basic rock and roll arrangements, we talked about that. But some of the updated versions are better than their original songs, like Silly Boy Blue. I do like better on here than I do on its original record. But in the end, I can't rank it too highly because of that, of this whole middle age crisis era of him. Nothing's offensive, but nothing really blows my mind, except for a few tracks. And that being said, I also think there was a leaked version of this, which had Uncle Floyd and Afraid, Uncle Floyd becoming Slip Away. If those tracks were on this new version of Toy, I might have ranked it higher as well, because those are great tracks, and those versions that are on there, while not as good as the Heathen versions, are still very good, and they're great songs. They were written in that era. So anyway, three favorites. Toy, Your Turn to Drive. Greg, you said it best. It's an original written for this era, written in that style, and it is a standout. It doesn't quite fit. Maybe it could have gone on Heathen. Who knows? Second favorite track for me is Conversation Piece, which I'm sure some of us will talk about a little later. But it's a great 60s B-side to what got one of his very early singles. And it's Pretty Star maybe or something, but it's awesome. This version of it on here is really somber, and it was released as a B-side from the Heathen era, so at least we got to have that version of it as well before came out. And then my favorite is Shadow Man, which I love in all forms, including the Ziggy form and the ballad form. It really does work. His voice is beautiful on that one. The really nice Mike Garson piano on it, the twinkling, the way it just kind of fades in and out of, the clouds, I really love. So, Toy, number 25.
All right, 25 for me. This is the follow-up album to the wildly successful Let's Dance album. I'm going to go back to 1984 with Tonight, an album that Greg already featured. Out of the 9 tracks, 5 of them are either cover songs or songs that he and Iggy Pop wrote together that were originally released on Iggy albums. There's Greg already talked about the reggae. Um, there's lots of marimba on this record. There's some really great bass lines on this one. Tumble and Twirl, such a cool bass line. The song itself, kind of lukewarm on. I keep forgetting and Dancing with the Big Boys are my least favorite moments on this one. And I'm going to just jump right into my 3 favorite picks. And I know this is not a popular opinion because Greg already gave his, but I love the Beach Boys version. I love the cover of God Only Knows. I've always loved it. And I wait for that vocal peak right at the song's conclusion where Bowie gets really vocally intense there. And I always have liked his version of Neighborhood Threat. I don't think it's as good as the Iggy version, but I like what he does with some of the melodic choices in the chorus section and the verses. And number 1 favorite is Loving the Alien. But 25 for me is 1984's Tonight. All right, Frank, 20 or Greg, sorry, 24, Greg.
All right. I'm gonna piggyback on what both of you said about 1973's pinups. It doesn't feel like it was really necessary. I mean, yeah, Frank was right. It's a stopgap, but it does feel like filler. There's too much for my particular taste, foppish British invasion, Carnaby Street type stuff, which I'm not a huge fan of. I get the concept, but for me, it just doesn't really suit Bowie's voice or his style. His delivery on it just doesn't quite work, in my opinion, and I don't even like some of the originals that much. There's not enough raunchy rock on it. Like as far as that era of the him and the Spiders, they did such a cool job on like the more raunchy things, like their Velvet Underground or Rolling Stones covers. Um, I just feel like this is lacking that kind of energy. If it had, say, White Light, White Heat, or Waiting for the Man, or Let's Spend the Night Together, or some of those kind of things in that vein, I think I would enjoy it a lot more. I worship glam era Bowie, and I rarely, if ever, play pinups. So, what does that say about it? As far as three songs, number three, I Wish You Would. Number two, since I am a big Kinks fan and I like how he does this one, I think Where Have All the Good Times Gone is really nice. And the standout track, as Frank mentioned to me, is Sorrow, which really feels like an intentional track, where the rest of it just feels like, oh, we tossed some of this off. So can't rank it any higher. Pinups.
That was Greg's number 24. I feel like Pinups is the only album that the three of us has shown so far. So over to you, Frank, for number 24.
Well, this is the second one, and this is the highest placement for it. 1984's Tonight is my number 24. And, you both have said so much about it, much of it negative, but I really had a big soft for it. Firstly, look at this cover. I love it. I love stained glass, maybe the old softy in me, the old religious aspect. I don't know. It's beautiful. I think it's I think it's a nod to a painting. I forget which right now, but it's a great cover. The cracks in the beautiful stained glass facade, though, are showing on this record, like you've all talked about. Let's Dance was lightning in a bottle. The label won another hit. It's a tale as old as time. And of course, this record suffered for it. And of course, you talked about Iggy Boogaloo here. There's so many covers on this one. But those two original tracks on here are two of Bowie's strongest. So for me, I love it for that alone. It's also controversial, but I don't mind the reggae stuff on here. I mean, it's no different than The Police to me. I mean, the Police are obviously a better band in a lot of ways than this record, but it's still the same thing. To me, a British musician finds reggae, decides to go that route. It gives me, I don't mind that flavor so much. And I do agree, though, that I'm glad he kind of let it go after this one, though. And of course, Greg, you mentioned how great it was that he helped Iggy out. So obviously, got to give much love to that. Helped his friend out of many a jam and got him wrote some great songs together on this one. I think in general there were more tracks that they wrote together that were not released. I've read that there's a lot of really cool experimental, more arty stuff. I would love to hear what happened there. Someone open the vaults for that, please. Like, please give me a version of Tonight where all the covers are gone and there's just original Iggy and Bowie tracks that just rip. I'd love that. So, in the end, though, my three favorite tracks, I'm going to go with Dancing with the Big Boys. I know you both kind of poo-pooed on it, but I kind of love it. I do love that Big Boys thing. Is that Iggy? I think I'm pretty sure it's Iggy doing that. It's such an Iggy move, like Real Wild Child. That kind of thing he does, like that really deep croon. Love it. Second favorite is Blue Jean, which is a really great signal and a really wild 20-minute short film by Julian Temple. If you haven't seen it, really great to watch. And number one is the sprawling, underrated, big, dark, dramatic, best 80s track, and in one of my top 10 Bowie tracks of all time, Loving the Alien. I love both the studio version, I love the single version, I love the Jerry Leonard reality tour version, which I got to hear him do on one of those Bowie alumni tours after Bowie had died. I just love Loving the Alien, front to back, all of it. It's such a beautiful track. And the lyrics about the Templars and the Saracens and the traveling to the Holy Land, the whole thing is just great. It's a really masterful song. And for me, if it was the only song on the record, it would be probably my favorite Bowie record. Anyway, 1984's Tonight. Highest placement yet.
All right. Some of these, it pains me where I'm putting them, but everything has to go somewhere, right? So number 24 for me is going to be Black Tie White Noise from 1993. A total departure from the work that he was doing in Tin Machine. The second Tin Machine and the last one came out just 2 years before in 1991. This is the album that reunited him with Nile Rodgers from Chic, who produced Let's Dance. And Spider's guitarist Mick Ronson makes an appearance on this before he passed. It's a lush production. There's great grooves, there's horns, but there are some songs that I've just never loved. The title track, Black Tie White Noise. I've never been able to get fully behind Miracle Good Night and You've Been Around and I Feel Free. But then there are some just incredibly stellar moments on this one. I love the Walker Brothers cover of Night Flights. I think it's Bowie's version is fantastic. When I saw Bowie on the Outside Tour in 1995, they did play that live. Jump They Say, which was this single from this record written in tribute to his brother. That track, just a great upbeat groove. And my absolute favorite number one song on this one is the closing track, the wedding song, the vocal version, because it opens up with the instrumental one. written for when he married Iman. Uh, I've told these guys, I've DJ'd my both of my brothers' weddings over the years, and I always play that song, even if no one else knows it except for me. I play it for myself, but I think that's such a beautiful song, the wedding song. So that's it for me at number 24, 1993's Black Tie White Noise.
All right, number 23 three for me is Tin Machine 2, the follow-up to their debut. I don't know if before this, preparing for this video, if I'd ever really given the album a full listen before, and I was actually pleasantly surprised at how much I did like it. I felt that the great stuff on it was truly exceptional, better to me by far than anything on Tin Machine 1. Particularly, Amlapura was a wow. I just was blown away by that song. But the worst stuff, is worse than anything on the first, in my opinion, the first Tin Machine album. This album really got sunk a lot for me by the two songs sung by Hunt Sales, in a way that even the worst stuff on the other albums didn't sink them. Still, considering it's ahead of six other albums I've put on here, played mentioned so far, I mean that's not too bad. I just want to mention those two. The first one is a song called Stateside, which is god awful bar band bovine excrement, and it's terrible. The second is this corny ballad, Sorry. It's so schmaltzy that it might in fact be the worst song I've ever heard on a Bowie album. Yeah, worse than anything on the first 1967 package. Honestly, for me, if you removed a third of this album, including the worst stuff, and you added in the best like four songs from the first Tin Machine album, you'd have a great album. But as it is, it's just too unbalanced for me to rate any higher than 23. As far as three songs, number three was hard because I ended up picking Betty Wrong, but it also could have been Shopping for Girls, which is a very disturbing and amazing song that was a close honorable mention. Number two, You Belong in Rock and Roll, great song. And my favorite, as I mentioned before, Abla Pora, which is probably my favorite Bowie track, chronologically speaking, since Let's Dance up to that point. So yeah, Tin Machine 2 at 23.
Okay. Over to you, Frank, number 23.
All right, number 23 is 1987's Never Let Me Down, which is another vinyl problem record because I just found out recently that every version of the tracks on here, there's really so many things cut out of this. Like the versions of vinyl are shorter. But I grew up with this vinyl copy, so who knows? Anyway, but if you look up the word front loaded in the dictionary, though, there's definitely a picture of this record in there. It's so front loaded. It's got like all the best stuff is in the first half, and then it really does fail hard towards the end. And that's one thing I want to say about this and tonight is when Bowie fails hard, he gives it his all. So I mean, he really gave it his all on this record, and he really gave it his all on tonight. And for that, I kind of love those for that. But we have I have some really good memories of watching the Glass Spider tour. I know, Greg, it was your first time seeing Bowie, and I'm sure that was disappointing in that way. But I watched it on TV, on an old college TV with my friend Becky, and I had a good time laughing at that, let me tell you. It was a real good, real fun time watching all the weird things and the spinning and all the real big dance moves. It was so choreographed, and who knows what was going on. I mean, it's jumping out of you from the cover there. But I do want to talk about a little bit about the not 19 it came out after he died, 2017, 2018 re-recording of this record, which features a lot of the major players in his post-80s career. Reeves Gabrels does something on it. I think Mario J. McNulty works on it. Maybe Jerry Leonard. There's a lot of really great players, and it even makes me like 87 and Cry because it replaces Mickey Rourke's rap with Laurie Anderson, which is a really inspired choice. I wish that happened in the original album. Laurie Anderson was a force in the mid to late 80s. That'd been fantastic. So if we were ranking that version, this would have been given some of the classics a run for its money. But really, in the end, it's funny about also I don't know if anybody, Greg, you didn't mention this. I don't know if Brett, you plan to, but Too Dizzy is a track that is on the record and was cut from every single CD and reissue of this record since. It's by Bowie himself. He thought it was that embarrassing. I love that we have it on the record, though, because we left Too Dizzy on, but we cut Glass Spider. I don't know what that's about. But that's the one track, minus even Sorry or Stateside, that he was like, I can't, no, that I never did it. So some revisionist history on a Bowie record there. Anyway, my top three favorite tracks in this one. I love Glass Spider for the reasons Greg mentioned. It's very art house Bowie, little juvenile compared to maybe Future Legend or some of the Berlin records, but it's still a lot of fun. Mommy Come Back with the Water's All Gone, Ja, 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 Ja. Number two is Never Let Me Down, which was written for Coco Schwab, his main woman in that way, did so much for him and did so much from the 70s and the 80s, got in a lot of the jams, helped him out, was his assistant, all these things. What a great track, written in kind of a John Lennon style. Love the harmonica on it. Love that tribute. Love this track. And my favorite is Time Will Crawl, which is a bop. And I feel that's like a lost, if but outdated gem.
Right. 23. Frank talked about this one surprisingly very early on in this video. But for me, I'm going to go with The Next Day.
Like who I
2013.
am,
So 2013, the secretly recorded album that brought Bowie back after an almost 10-year absence. Um, it was so great to have a new record after such a long wait. But there was, granted it had been so long, so a lot of material was being written, a lot of material was being recorded. But it's one of those albums that I think would have benefited by being trimmed down by some songs just to make it a little bit more leaner. But obviously there was additional tracks on the EPs and stuff, so there was a wealth of recordings. Um, but I kind of wish this one, the album proper, had been culled a bit. Three favorite tracks: The Stars Are Out Tonight. Number two, I'm going to go with Frank already talked about Heat. What a way to close the album. Frank already said Scott Walker. I second that. Galen Dorsey's fretless bass. Those soaring climactic strings are beautiful. It's super dark, and it wouldn't have felt too out of place on 1995's Outside, in my opinion. My number one pick, Where Are We Now? When this dropped out of nowhere, just totally blown away. And I hoped that the rest of the album would have had the feel of that. And then Heat, like if it would have been in that realm, um, it would have been so, so super exciting. Um, I did get off the train at Potsdamer Platz when I was on tour in Germany back in 2019. And Tony Levin plays bass on Where Are We Now? It's a wonderful vocal performance by Bowie. As long as there's sun, as long as there's rain, as long as there's fire, that he kind of repeats each one of those twice. And then when he gets to Me and You, he only sings those just once. And it's always made me think that Me and You were one and the same. And I love that effect. It's a goosebump track for me. Where are we now? But yeah, The Next Day sits at number 23 for me.
All right, number 22 for me is this the highest placement for this so far? Is 1999's Hours. Um, as you guys said, after Outside and Earthling, he went in this warmer, more humanistic, nostalgic direction. It's funny because I liked it very much at the time. I think part of that was that, where I was in my life then, I was a new dad. I was in a kind of suburban cocoon, just kind of chilling. I was listening to a lot of mellow, sort of indie, folky type rock, like Amy Mann and Elliott Smith and Rufus Wainwright. And in that context, Hours felt nice. It worked for me in that moment, exemplified by something like the soulful opener, Thursday's Child. But I feel like it did not age super well. Now looking back at it, 26 years later, it feels a little too languid, a little too washed out, lacking in energy. I feel the cover art really doesn't help. It's kind of got this hokey millennial era cliche design. Some of the things just sound recycled, like a title like Pretty Things Are Going to Hell is the title's just too on the nose. The song is pretty clunky. I think one issue with this record is that the B-sides from this era, like No One Calls, We All Go Through, and We Shall Go to Town, are all fantastic, and they should have been on here, and they would have elevated the record and brought a lot more intensity to it. But as it is, I can't rank it as high as might have back then. So as far as three songs, number three, I'm going to go with the song Seven, which has a nice space oddity, hunky dory kind of vibe. Number two, the track Survive, which I think has some fantastic guitar playing by Reeves Gabrels. And my favorite song on the record is "What's Really Happening," which again, excellent guitar work by Reeves, and his solo is stunning on that song. So there are some really nice moments on it. I would say from about this point onward, I really like all the records. I don't really have a lot of bad things to say, but it just compared to some of the other more intense records from the era, it just doesn't really hold up. So that's number 22 from the Hours.
Well, I'm going to piggyback off you for that, for my number 22. So yes, this is the highest it's placing. And it's funny though, you say you liked it less. I like it better than I used to. This I hinted at it already. I didn't like this when it came out. I loved Earthling. I thought this was like, what is this? It was such a, you know, nostalgic, looking back, quiet acoustic record in many spots. And getting this after Earthling, I mean, I know that Bowie does this, but it was just like I could not hang at the time at all, and it really almost killed my fandom. This is Reeves Gabrel's last record with Bowie after 10 years of innovation, and it really, with so much exciting things happening around him, it just really felt like a step down. But then again, now that I'm a dad, and now that I've kind of settled into liking all this folk rock stuff that we're talking about and getting a little more chill about that stuff, I like it more. So it's really funny that you like it less and I like it more, but it still sits the same number for us, right? I don't dislike. Yeah, right. That kind of balanced itself. I find that it is a disjointed record. You both hinted at already that there are a lot of different things going on here. The B-sides, it could have been two records. I hear it was definitely going in a different direction. Reeves Gabrel thought it sounded like Diamond Dogs. It had a lot more aggression and weird experimental tracks. 1917 could have fit with the Dreamers or New Angels of Promise. Tracks like that would have, and I wouldn't have minded a really folky, reflective album, and I wouldn't have minded a really Earthling-ish bridge, but I think that cramming them on the one record and cutting a lot of the stuff was really a mistake. And this record really fights to figure out what it's trying to be, and it does struggle a bit. But there's very little I do dislike. Although Greg, you did mention What's Really Happening. That's the one where the fan wrote the lyrics, and in general, I like his Ozzy Osbourne-ish delivery on that one. But those lyrics that the fan wrote, it's like, why'd you do that? Anyway, I do like it better than Toy, and I do like it a lot more now than I used to. So my three favorite tracks, we already talked about Seven. It's a beautiful track, number 3. Number 2, I love Something in the Air. I also love it on American Psycho, which is a remix version that I heard in the credits when I saw that movie in the theater. My mom let me go. And number 1 for me is If I'm Dreaming My Life, which is a big, long, epic Neil Youngish track that has a very hymnal extended outro, that Dreaming My, which I love. It almost feels like a little bit of a sister's track to Word on a Wing in that way. And it's really just the way it opens up into the heavens is really pretty. And that's, to me, always been my favorite on this record. So Hours at 22.
Yeah, I'm with you, Frank. I like Hours, even though it ranked, pretty low on my list. I do like it more now than I did when it came out. And there's nothing I really just dislike over. What's really happening? It's interesting that's Greg's number 1 pick because if that is my least favorite song on the record. Yeah. But interesting. Anyways, that's why it's so fun to do this and talk about it and share our opinions, sometimes completely conflicting. Number 22 for me, I'm gonna go with Toy. Originally set to release in 2001, got shelved, which Frank already discussed, gave us Heathen. Um, uh, I'm gonna just jump right into my 3 favorite picks on this one. A lot of the material, unlike I think both of you guys, the stuff that predated the 67 self-titled album, I was never that into. A lot of those songs, and a lot of those songs got touched on here. But my 3 favorites on this one, Silly Boy Blue, I think it's a completely successful update of one of my favorite tracks from his debut. Heavy string drones. There's this picked 12-string acoustic guitar in there, possible finger cymbals, and a flute in there. It's a stellar emotional vocal performance. Number 2, you guys both talked about Shadow Man, a outstanding ballad of a track originally recorded during the Ziggy sessions. So grateful that this version of it exists, and now has an official release where more people can enjoy it rather than as a B-side. And then, oh my God, how thrilled was I when I got that Heathen I'll pull it out here. Double CD set when that came out, and this toy version of Conversation Piece was on there. We will be discussing, you're right, Frank. We will be discussing Conversation Piece in detail. Um, Oftentimes, when an artist re-records from their past, it is just a reminder of how great the original song was, and the recording, updated recording is just kind of like, why did we need that? Not here, not on Shadow Man, not on Silly Boy Blue. I think those versions are just so beautiful. I love the original Conversation Piece with its kind of folkiness, but this kind of laid back with that drum beat, lush version is so outstanding. Anyways, I'm still holding up Heathen. There's Toy. So yeah, 22 for me is Toy.
All right, for 21, I'm gonna go with Black Tie, White Noise. I just liked this album when it came out. It still felt way too slick for me at a time when I was, 1993. I was newly obsessed with Suede, whose debut album it actually bumped from number one spot on the UK charts. And I think it just wasn't the album that I was looking for from him at the time. I think I wanted it to harken back to his glam era as clearly as, say, Suede did. But looking back many years later, decades later, and trying to approach the album on its own terms, it's really grown on me, and I really, really enjoyed it on this re-listen, and that's why it ranked as high as it did. Particularly the two wedding songs, the opening and closing tracks, are just fantastic with really alluring jazzy horns. Not cheesy horns. The album still has some flaws, I feel though. It's still a little too slick overall. Like there's a couple of places on the album where I stopped myself and said, "Am I listening to Bowie or is this CNC Music Factory?" But and the title track would have been, I feel like, could have been great with a bit more experimental production and minus I'll Be Sure, which I don't think really works at all. And I feel like the Morrissey cover is just dull as dishwater. I don't care for it at all. But the high points are really high. Number three track for me on the album is Don't Let Me Down Again, which is just charming. Number two, the instrumental, very cool and detached Palace Athena, which I feel like really points the way ahead to Outside. And my favorite track, as I previously mentioned, was Wedding Song, which is romantic and lush, but not cheesy. So, number 21, Black Tie, White Noise.
Are you sure? I'll be sure. Anyway, I'm also sure that we're piggybacking again
Oh,
so with Black Tie White Noise, and that's my next pick for 21. And you said so many great things about it. I loved this record when it came out, but in the end, I find nowadays, now we're at the period of Bowie's career where I'm ranking the records here because they're not sure what they need to be. So this record is we have Nile Rodgers back after doing the Real Cool World single, which we have right here. So Real Cool World is great. And then they decided to do another Trying to Be Let's Dance. And Nile Rodgers really wanted to be a hit that way. And Bowie's like, I'm really getting into art stuff again. I'm in Tim Machine. I want to be doing all this weird stuff. And I feel this record's kind of struggling to find its identity. So that to me is the flaw of this record. But it's got a lot of really great tracks. I mean, it's kind of too bad that Mick Ronson came back only to play on that cover track, which is not so great, I Feel Free, which I know is a Spiders throwback. They played I Feel Free all the time in the 70s, so it's kind of sweet in that way, but it really doesn't work on this record in that way. I hate that Morrissey cover too, Greg. Can't do it. Cannot hang. Don't Let Me Down and Down is one of the good covers though, but there really are so many covers in this too, and that sinks the record. But I do love the way this album starts. Unlike you both, I prefer the opening Wedding. I love it as an instrumental. I love those bells chiming. I love the way it sets the tone. I love the way that bass line was reappropriated by The Cure in their cover of Young Americans. When I first heard that, I was like, hey, that's The Wedding. I was already into The Wedding at that point. I love that. I do think there's some cool things on this record. Obviously, it does celebrate his love of Amon, like Miracle Goodnight and The Wedding. And you also have things him touching on some stuff with the LA riots, which I think was really intense. But in general, it's kind of got a lot of, ebb and flow to it. I like Lucy Can't Dance, which is an outtake from this track. I love that Lester Bowie gets to play trumpet in this. There's a meeting of the Bowies in this one. I think Jump They Say is a great track, but it's written about his late brother, Terry. And, but you're right, Greg. There is a lot of CNC Music Factory, New Jack Swing stuff on here that does sort of sink it on the whole. But it's my three favorite tracks, though. We already talked about The Wedding. I love that version of it. Number two, Palace Athena. I love those really intense cutting synth strings of jin, 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 and you already mentioned it, top points to outside. Absolutely does. And there's a really great Tao Jones dance single. It's around here somewhere. That's got a really cool version of that where he played in these like EDM tenths. Really cool. And then my favorite track on here, though, my by far is "You've Been Around," which is penned by Reeves Gabrels and from the Tin Machine era. Reeves Gabrels plays on it, but I'm pretty sure he's buried on this one. Kind of makes a little New Jack swingy in this arrangement, but I still love it. It's a great track. Kind of cuts. I love the trumpets and the horns on that, and those cutting '90s beats. And I actually only just recently realized that it goes changes in there somewhere, like a nice reference to that. Only picked that up for the first time re-listening to it, even though I love that song and I've heard it a lot of times. Reeves Gabrels has his own version of that track on the Sacred Squall of Now, which I think he just got mad that Bowie kind of buried him on it and redid it in the mid '90s, and has Gary Oldman singing a verse and Bowie singing as well. And it definitely delivers on that Tin Machine noise and chaos, but it's still a great track and one of Bowie's better early '90s numbers, and certainly one of the best things he did at that point for me after those '80s records that I like better than you all, apparently. Anyway, Black Tie White Noise, number 20 was wrong.
Number 21 for me is going to be the second Tin Machine album here, 1991. I remember seeing Tin Machine on Saturday Night Live. They performed Baby Universal back when this came out. This would be, of course, as previously mentioned, their final record, produced by Tim Palmer, who has mixed, recorded, produced a ton of bands, including, favorites like The Cure, U2, Pearl Jam, a whole bunch of bands. I think this is so much stronger of an effort than the debut. It's more sonically diverse, better songwriting. The band sounds more relaxed, and it's just an overall great sounding record. The first 7 tracks, really quite good, and then Stateside. Um, it's always kind of been of a downer since I've heard that one. Tin Machine was a band. The whole purpose of it was so it would be a true band, not David Bowie, but a democracy. But in my opinion, if David Bowie's in your band, David Bowie should only be the person that's singing lead vocals. And Hunt Sales is actually quite a good singer. He's got a solid range, but I would have much preferred to hear Bowie sing those two tracks, Stateside and Sorry. Um, yeah, but just to mention back to Stateside, referencing Home on the Range and Horse with No Name in the lyrics, it's just kind of a downer. But if I had to pick 3 tracks, not if I had to, I am picking 3 tracks. My third favorite is the Roxy Music cover, If There Is Something. I love the version, I love the original, and I'm hoping someday we will do a ranking of Roxy Music. Um, they originally recorded If There Is Something for the first album, and it's interesting, they took away a lot of that kind of pastoral country-esque vibe of the original. Bowie sounds great. Hunt Sales snare drum on that song, wow, it takes such a serious beating. There's such a hard-hitting crack on that. Gabrels leans really heavy into that whammy pedal on his first lead break, which is super cool. Second favorite, Greg already talked about it, You Belong in Rock and Roll. It's another great Bowie vocal performance. Well, so do I. There's so much ear candy in the mix, including that baritone sax. There's some real distant acoustic strums. I think it's a great song. But my absolute, since I first got this album back in the early '90s, my absolute favorite song, and you will hear me often say, top tier. My top tier Bowie list is pretty lengthy, but Goodbye, Mr. Ed has a place in my top tier Bowie tracks, and that is my favorite song from the second Tin Machine album. Tony Sales is a great bass player, and he really shines on this as well. So number 19 for me is Tin Machine number 2.
It's funny. Sorry to interrupt real quick. That I rewatched that Saturday Night Live the other day. I just found a treasure trove of all those old episodes with the musical guests. They did a great cover of the great version of that Roxy Music cover on that Saturday Night Live episode.
Oh,
And
was
that
that
was,
the second song they played?
yeah, it was. It was,
Ah,
when you were young. Yeah,
God, I
it's
love that
very
song.
formative to me just seeing that Tin Machine on Saturday Night Live back in the '90s. Yeah.
All right, it's back over to you, Greg, for number
All right.
18.
Number 20, actually.
Oh, is it?
Yep.
Oh, my numbering got mixed up. My apologies, everyone.
No worries. Number 20 for me is 1993's Buddha of Suburbia. which is a really solid and underrated, if not for me at least, particularly exciting album. I ignored it at the time, which is unusual for me, but the US release had been delayed. And I was really too crazy for Britpop at the time to pay much attention to it past a couple of spins. But listening to it now, I really have grown to appreciate it a lot. I really love how low key and warm it is. Some other things I really like about the album, I appreciate how songs like Ian Fish and the Mysteries harken back to the Low and Heroes era instrumentals. They have that kind of celestial, vibe to them. I also like the jazzy explorations of South Horizons. That's like, some of his best jazz material. And I love something like Dead Against It, which has a real Blondie new wave vibe. So I think it's a cool album. It's underrated for sure. I can't rank it that much higher because I feel like it's maybe missing a certain level of excitement that I would want it to have, but I do really like it. As far as three songs, number three, the aforementioned the Mysteries. Number two, the title track, which has some really sweet chiming guitar. And my favorite by far is Untitled Number One, which has hypnotic rhythms. I love how near the end it's his first major use of the Mark Bolan vocal trill since Black Country Rock and Holy Holy, and it's like, oh, hadn't heard him do that in a long time. How sweet. So yeah, as I said, the one word I'd use to describe this album is underrated.
And I know you're putting it where it is, and I know you love it. So I'm also going to say this, but my next pick, because I love it. Any record, honestly, after the bottom two or three for me, I have like or love for. So it pains me to put it here. But for me, my number 20, Space Oddity, the second record from 1969. I really love this record. And I remember distinctly not having the money to buy it, the Ryko edition, when I was in middle school and begging my mom for it anyway, because they finally found it. They finally stocked it. And she did. She bought it for me, and I couldn't listen to it until I paid her back until my next allowance cycle, right? And but I used to go sneak into the room, grab it, take a couple listens to it, and then put it back. So I really have a really fuzzy memory of doing that. There's some really cool tracks on this. I mean, it's really streets ahead of the debut. The songwriting quality of it does improve here. You have some Tony Visconti and Gus Dudgeon adding production, so he's working with he's making those relationships. Mick Ronson starts to work around in this era on some of the B-side versions, the single versions of tracks on here. So you have the novelty smash that kicks it off. Space Oddity is a great track. Put them on the map. It's weird that it kind of was considered a novelty, and the rest of this record is like folky, Bob Dylan-esque, psychedelic, and I really like a lot of that about it. There's a lot of magic and a lot of joy and a lot of heartbreak throughout this record. And really, the album centerpiece, though, but it's got those like really Nietzschean, dark, mystical the centerpiece, Silent Committee, is really outstanding to me, and it's so the first sprawling Bowie epic in that way that tags in that mysticism that he does. I did listen to the 2019 mix that came out, and I do not prefer it. Minus the fact that it did restore conversation piece into the track listing, which I preferred. I do think that track, like Brad's already mentioned. I've talked about it twice now, so I'm not going to talk about it later, but it is a wonderful track and does kind of belong in this era and fit with this era. And I don't really get in the mood for this record often, but when I do, it's a great listen. So I'm always going to have a soft spot. And again, I do kind of regret putting it here and really do. Anyway, so my favorite tracks, we have the really sad, wistful for number three, Letter to Hermione, written. It's one of the few actual autobiographical tracks, one of the few moments of actual real feeling from Bowie in a career of masks and shadows and what is it real, is it not? Letter to Hermione is all real. It's all about her, and the breakup with her really hurt him, and that song is beautiful. Track number second favorite is Wild Eyed Boy from Free Cloud. It's this big epic track that sweeping strings, bells, but such a subtle. It's the way it's masterful the way you put it together. The dynamics on it are so perfect. And my favorite track, I already mentioned it, Silent Committee, Say No More. It's so weird and glorious and intense. But yeah, that's what I have to say about Space Oddity.
Number 20 for me, Disco Brat. 1987's Never Let Me Down. I think this is the highest appearance on the list. Is that correct? Yeah. So I there's a few artists that, we've done re-rankings that I originally did years and years ago, either on my own or with a guest. And I never rewatch those just to see where I place things. And I'm almost positive that this was in either maybe the second to last place, if I remember correctly. Um, but over the years since then, I've gotten pretty fond of this record, and a lot of that is in more the last recent times through that updated, re-recorded version that was included on one of the box sets that was put out that collects certain years. Um, I think it really brought out kind of the soul of the songs more. So if you haven't listened to the 2018 reimagined version of that album, be sure to check that one out. And I'm hoping someday it gets like a separate standalone release for that one. Yeah, it's not a perfect record by any means. Most of the second side doesn't hold up to the first, um, except I really like his version of Bang Bang. But anyways, let's dig into my three favorites. Time Will Crawl, number three for me. I also think Zeros is a great track, number two. But referencing, Disco Brat, Beat of Your Drum is my number one on this. I think it's such a great song. But yeah, Never Let Me Down sits at number 20 for me, which was a huge change in years past. All right, Greg, you're number 19.
I'm going with The Next Day from 2003. I definitely agree. Frank referenced this before, the critics saying at the time, and no, I don't think it's his best since Scary Monsters, blah blah blah. And it's not remotely as consistent or excellently executed as Outside or Heathen, to name two of his later masterpieces. But I did really enjoy the first half of this album a lot. I feel like it starts so strong, but then it falls off really big in the second half. The album is too long and it is a bit overrated, but I still really like it a lot. Um, I feel like Valentine's Day and the touching Where Are We Now have a bit of a suede vibe and these nice dreamy guitars. I really like how Dirty Boys has this grimy staccato funk that recalls some of his stuff with Iggy or even Iggy's own late 70s work. Um, and then You Feel So Lonely You Could Die has that soulful Ziggy DNA that you hear in 5 Years and Soul Love, which I like. So it touches back on these things without being too much of a Xerox of something he previously did. But like I said, I can't rate it higher because I feel like the second half is just like a bit of a dive. So three songs for the next day. I'm going to go number three, Love Is Lost. Number two, the title track, which has this real scratchy, ebullient vibe that reminds me of Scary Monsters. And my favorite track is, as I mentioned before, Valentine's Day, which is uber romantic, even though if the lyrics maybe really aren't, but it feels that way to me, and it has just a lovely melody. And I love that song as soon as it came out, and I still love it today. So number 19, The Next Day.
Hmm. I was just looking through my singles while Brett was talking about Never Let Me Down, and boy, do I sure have a lot of Never Let Me Down material on single. I have like two 7 inches, two 12 inches. Here's the Day in, Day Out extended remix. Man, I just bought this era up. Who knows, man? Anyway,
I have a
also,
little 7-inch box set for Day In, Day Out. Do you have that?
I just have
It's like
this
in a little cardboard box. Yeah.
it's just 7 inch. But the tracks Julie and Girls, by the way, which I'm
Yeah.
not gonna talk, anybody's gonna talk about later, are leagues better than the album too. So, and then When the Wind Blows from that era, also very good. Anyway, also well said though about Next Day. This is going to be the lowest ranking for it, and this is another one that I'm shocked to put it here. But 1983's Let's Dance is my next pick. And Bowie's bid for commercial success was almost his undoing, as they say. But what a fun album, though. I don't listen to it much, and really, I'm not a big '80s synth pop glitzy fan like that. Like the big '80s, not even synth pop. Sorry, excuse me. Big '80s pop is not necessarily always my bag, man. So, but it's really for it being an '80s record. It's not quite an '80s record. It has a lot of production, but you also have Stevie Ray Vaughan working with Nile Rodgers, who had just gotten, massive through Chic. So there's that disco, but it's not disco either. It's not disco. It's not blues. It's not art pop. What is it? there's a lot of interest in R&B and soul music and disc on this one, and I do like a lot of that. I could see why you want to move in this direction. Bowie was very concerned with his image around this time after being the first of the new wave boys, right? Creating this whole sound and genre with the Ziggy era and the Berlin records. That was such a big thing. He's like, well, I want a piece of that pie too, dang it. And he got it. He definitely got it. This made him a massive star between Let's Dance, Modern Love, China Girl, even like almost most of this record singles, or it's also short tracks. Like even all of its singles, I think. It's one of those records like almost like Thriller that almost every track's a hit to some extent. And I get it. I also think it's cool that he put a cover of Metro's Criminal World on here because that's such a subversive track. It's really, it firstly helped get Peter Godwin on the map, a great 80s pop synth pop star, but also really, really definitely subversive in that way. Sexual undertones of that track. Putting on a massive mainstream record on this was genius. I think it was a really cool way for him to still be the 70s persona, the sexually ambiguous character that he's always known for, while still also being the everyman. So I thought that was really a neat cover on there, but it's not one of my favorite tracks, but it's cool. Especially in the middle of the AIDS crisis, by the way. He put that out right in the middle, when that was starting to really be a thing. I don't know. It's pretty impressive that he did that. Anyway, I listened to this album for full, and I hear it in chunks. So putting on front to back, though, it was really nice to spend time with this album again. Even though it's not ranking as high, I have a great time with it. It still sounds fresh, and it really is a good time. So my three favorite tracks. Oh, before I do that, I did have a chance to hang out at the power station where this was recorded. This and Scary Monsters recorded. It was really cool to bask in that space. Just be in this room with, look at the wood paneling, seeing a gold record of this on the wall, and just being like, oh, this was recorded here. Cool. Thanks for the invite, Hillary and my Bootblacks friends, and we're good to hang out with you all there. Anyway, so best tracks. Okay, number 3, Let's Dance, which is the first track I ever DJ'd back in middle school or high school. We were, Christopher Tucci, the DJ at the school, gave me a chance to play maybe 15 minutes of music, 7 minutes of which was Let's Dance. So I was, and that song never fails to get me on a dance floor. You put that on, I come running. You put it on another state, I'll be there by the time the song's over. I'm not even kidding. It's that good. It's that awesome. It's that much of a banger. Number 2 for me on this one is Modern Love, which is a blast. Another great subversive Bowie lyric writing. It's very dark, very doom and gloom, and he makes it into this ripping pop song. Really awesome that he did that. And my favorite track on this is the weird art rock one, where it's Ricochet. It really feels like it's got an awkward beat, kind of swings in and out. It's not really quite coherent. Mine shafts, things like that, like these weird spoken, and who can dare to be forgotten? Hooah! These really bizarre things happening in it, but it's such a cool track, and I love it. So yeah, I've always found that track interesting, and I've always found this record a lot of fun.
All right. Number 19 for me, I'm going to go with Buddha of Suburbia, 1993. The low-key kind of gateway soundtrack album that led him and us to Outside, moving Bowie out of the pop-leaning string of albums from 83 to 93, minus, of course, Tin Machine. We really get a sense of what was to come when you hear South Horizon, especially in Mike Garson's piano parts and the distant trumpet. Also, Bleed Like a Crazed Dad hints at that. It was a difficult one to find back then when it came out. I remember getting it on CD. Import price, I think it was about $33. The one low point of the album for me has always been the track Sex in the Church. Just kind of the repetitiveness of it. And we talked about Black Tie White Noise and how that album is bookended with the instrumental version of the wedding and then the vocal version at the end. This album does something ballpark that where it has the opening title track, which is a fantastic song, and then there's the version of it that ends it that features Lenny Kravitz on guitar, and it just feels like one of those bonus tracks that should have just been a bonus track released as a B-side or something that it shouldn't have been in the album's running order. So that's a little bit of a weak spot for me. You have an early version of Strangers When We Meet, which we'll talk about when we get to Outside. But three favorites, The Mysteries. I think Greg already said that. It would not have been out of place on side two of Heroes. It's a stunning track. Number two, also, Greg, you talked about Dead Against It. I love it's a new wavy track. It's catchy, it's emotional, and it's a total deep cut in Bowie's catalog. If anyone watching this is unfamiliar with it, check out Dead Against It. But my absolute favorite track is the Buddha of Suburbia, the the opening version, not the Lenny Kravitz guitar version of it. There's lyrical references to all the madmen from The Man Who Sold the World. You also hear that dun, 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 from Space Oddity, a little nod to that as well, which I think is always really cool when an artist will make a little nod to his past work or their past work. I always find that really fascinating. So number 19 for me is 1993's The Buddha of Suburbia.
All right, number 18, I'm going with Reality. This album really excited me at the time it came out in 2003, and I have really fond memories around it because I saw my second and last Bowie concert for this tour the following year, which was absolutely incredible. Completely made up for my lackluster experience at the Glass Spider tour of 1987. He was phenomenal. The band was phenomenal, and I associate this album with that time period and with that tour. And in fact, I think one of the notable things about the album is that the new band he had at that time really sounds warm and live on this record. It makes it a really pleasant listen. If I had to critique anything about it, I would say number one, the guitar playing is a little subpar for a Bowie album, considering how many great albums he has with such stunning guitar work from various people. Um, and then the other kind of slight negative about it is the album starts awesome and it ends amazingly, but it's kind of bland in the middle. There's a spot in there of a few songs where it just kind of feels like it could have been it could have some fat could have been trimmed. But overall, I still really like the album a lot. So that's why I'm ranking it at 18. So Reality, as far as number three songs. Number three, I think you mentioned it, Brett. Fall Dog Bombs the Moon has a great groove. Recalls Lodger a little bit for me. Number two, killer single, New Killer Star. I love it. It hit me right away on the first listen. Still like it. And then number three is, I think, one of the greatest of late period Bowie tracks. Um, Bring Me the Disco King. It's an epic. It's nocturnal, jazzy, majestic, spare. It in a way kind of prefigures the mood and vibe of Blackstar. It leaves you feeling deliciously lonesome and wanting more of this empty space that's there after the song ends. I just love it. I feel like it's one of his great achievements of the latter portion of his career, and in a way that it's kind of an underrated track because I don't think it kind of gets as much attention as it should. So number 18, Reality.
And Greg, we are so in sync in this video because that's where it probably fits for me as well. And you both have said so much about it, the energy of the band. Well, the strong band. Maybe the cover is a little bit sink it or swim it for me. But I really love how this comes out swinging and doesn't really let up for air. And even the songs that are somber on it don't really come up for air. Like like Loneliest Guy is it's such a hopeful but sad song that it takes my breath away in that way. So really, though, this has come up a lot higher, just like ours has, because this did not do it for me when it came out because I loved Heathen so much that Reality just felt like it was the same formula, right? Start with a big bang and opening track. I mean, not that Sunday and New Killer are the same, but start with a really strong track, go right into a cover, and then pepper covers throughout. Same band, same Jerry Leonard, same Rip Torn, same folks. It seemed like kind of people seem to prefer it to Heathen, which I still don't get. But on the whole, I've come to appreciate it for what it is. I've come to appreciate it as its own thing. This is also, it was cool to like Bowie when this came out finally after so many years of being like a closeted Bowie fan. It was just he came back out Modern Force. He was all over like Good Morning America. The tour was a massive success. I actually passed on seeing the tour because I was a poor student. I just moved to the city, or either way, it was just before I was going to, and I had like no dollars. And I remember being like, well, I just saw him on the Heathen tour. He'll be around. He's playing so much. I'll see him again, won't I? Sure enough, never did, and he never toured again. But there's I really thought I would have another chance. But anyway, getting to really becoming to appreciate this album. It's on a really, there's a lot of gems on it. It was really hard to pick three. I love Fall Dog Bombs the Moon. I think Nuclear Star is such a great opener, Greg. You really summed it up perfectly, so I'm not going to talk about it. And actually, I will talk about other ones. My number three favorite is going to be Looking for Water. I love that repetitive bang on it. It does sound like that it's almost like Trout again. So that and then when it lets go into this, like again, I seem to love these Bowie tracks where the song just kind of opens up to the heavens, and that Looking for Water does too. It kind of twinkles away and looking for water, looking and just the way it kind of is a cappella there, which is a little bit of twinkle. I love that track. I just DJed it recently and I fell in love with it doing that, so I had to put it in my top three for this. So Looking for Water is number three. Number two is The Loneliest Guy, which really is haunting and it really resonates with me, even though he says it's not me, I'm not the loneliest guy, but I still resonate with what else he's saying about it. And then, you already talked about Bring Me the Disco King, but I do want to say it's so great that track finally existed, because it was attempted for Black Tie, White Noise and Earthling, and I would have loved to hear how Bring Me the Disco King sounded in those eras. But I'm really glad we got this really dark, sprawling, jazzy closing track to this record. And if it was, I first heard it on the Underworld soundtrack. So there's this version of this track with Maynard singing on it, Lisa Germano, John Frusciante. It's like no frills, all stops, uh, all stops pulled out on it. And surely that was the first version. But then, so it took me a while to warm up to the version on Reality. But when I did, I really just fell in love with it. And if it would have been the last thing he ever released before he went away and before he passed away, it would have been a great final track. So anyway, Reality, number 18.
There's a track on Lou Reed's The Raven album, which coincidentally I think came out also in 2003, and I think it's called the Disappearing Act. You guys know that one? It just it reminds me, as you were talking about The Loneliest Guy. It those songs feel like parallels. They don't sound like anything, but in mood and vibe, they just feel like kindred spirits. But if anyone watching unfamiliar with that track from The Raven, it's a really somber, beautiful track that's reminiscent of Loneliest Guy. All right, number 18 for me. I think this album's first appearance on this list. I'm gonna go with 1997's Earthling. Jungle beats, sample heavy, rooted in late 90s, drum and bass, 90s drum and bass. It's a great headphone album. There's lots of layering, ear candy flying all around. Um, it's a great album. It's a number 18. It just shows you how incredible this body of work is that we're discussing here. Why it kind of ranks lower on the list. The track Looking for Satellites has always been my least favorite. The shampoo, blah blah blah. Never have been. I know Frank has got the heart up there. And those of you that remember around the time this came out, Telling Lies was an early single, which was one of the first like digital songs that you could buy on the internet. I love that little two-note bass, do do do, telling lies, which goes in unison with the vocal part there. Such a tight bass tone. Three favorite tracks: Battle for Britain, that crazy, super cool, unexpected Mike Garson piano solo in there. Number two favorite, 7 Years in Tibet. I mean, massive choruses. Gabriel's heavily affected, like wacky guitar lines. There's this really super cool Farfisa organ in there by Garson. Hello and Spiral Carpets on the Farfisa. And my number one favorite on this is Dead Man Walking. Those two counterpoint riffs that are in that post chorus are so nice. Verse two, once again, with Mike Garson's distant piano. And Galan Dorsey's backing vocals are always to wait for. So number 18 for me is 1997's Earthling.
All right, for number 17, I am going with 1969 Space Oddity, which is infinitely better than the prior self-titled David Bowie LP. but he still hasn't quite found his groove yet. And as Frank I think noted when he mentioned it earlier, it's a little spotty. It does have a nice warm production, which is mostly, I believe, Tony Visconti, though also, as you said, Gus Dudgeon's on there as well. I think this was his first really collaboration with Tony after Tony came over from working on the Tyrannosaurus Rex albums. It has some really cool stuff. Unwashed and Slightly Dazed is like this lovely hazy acoustic psych rock. Frank mentioned Signet Committee, which points towards the Ziggy sound. Both those tracks are really cool, though I kind of feel like maybe they're both maybe a teeny bit too long. I would have maybe liked them to be a little more tightened up. As far as like, there's a couple of moments that I'm not thrilled with. Like Janine is not a highlight for me. It's weird, like the guitar player, the lead guitar on that song, I believe it's by the guy from the band Junior's Eye. It sounds like the Grateful Dead, which I mean, I'm kind of a Dead fan, honestly, but I don't feel like it really works. It's kind of like a little incongruous. But the great stuff on the album is fantastic, and I'm just going to zip right ahead to my three songs and talk about them. Number three, the title track, which is, yeah, it's overplayed. Yeah, we're all burned out on it to some degree or another, but I just can't deny how great it is. It's the kind of song I never actually put on, but when it's on or I'm hearing it, I always have to hear it to the end. Number two, Memory of a Free Festival, which is this epic hippie jam. And I really love that about it. I particularly love the long Hey Jude type choral ending with Mark Bolan and co on backing vocals. It just makes you feel like you're sitting around a campfire at a festival with these guys. And then my favorite track, which Frank had mentioned, is Wild Eyed Boy from Free Cloud. I've always loved this song. I think since I was a teenager in the 80s and I think actually what got me into this song big time was watching the Ziggy Stardust movie, the live, video. I had like an old VHS tape of it, and he did it on there. And I wasn't really familiar with the song then, and I was like blown away by the performance. And then I went back and got Space Oddity, the album, and I've loved the song since then. I mean, it has that really cool descending vocal and orchestral motif, and just the way he sings some of the lines, like "Oh, it's the madness in his eyes," and especially that end part where he goes, "It's really you and really me." It always gives me chills. I feel like that's for me, his first real early masterpiece of a song. So not his greatest album, but definitely up. It's in the middle there. So Space Oddity at 17.
All right. Brace yourselves, everybody. Audience at home, you ready? Please don't turn the video off after this. My number, was it 17, is the coveted Sacred Cow, Hunky Dory. Yep, there it is. Boo. Oh no! By the way, I love this record, and I love everything, including most of even the bottom tier, which I've said before, and I'll say again before you all crucify me. Anyway, this album is considered his first masterpiece after some of the misfires and spotty records, and I just don't understand that. It has some such strong material on here, and has some real filler tracks. We've already talked about some filler and things. The filler on this one really sinks it. And we talked on the Cure video about Head in the Door, about that. That seems to be the one everybody goes to. I've met so many people that think Hunky Dory is his best record, that I say with Head in the Door, and I'm like, what are you hearing? Teach me your ways, because I don't understand. There's a great gateway drug for the uninitiated, right? There's a lot of really great songs, a lot of important tracks. Bowie finding his true voice, the glam stuff really gets you here. But really, it's those dang covers. It's those dang covers and all those tribute tracks on this one that sinks it for me. Minus Queen Bitch, which is a great Velvet Underground pastiche. I don't like any song he's tributing here. The Bob Dylan song. As a Dylan semi fan, that song to me doesn't sound like Bob Dylan so much as it sounds like Lynyrd Skynyrd's "Tuesday's Gone," which came out after. Don't get me wrong, but still, it's that classic rock. I can't really do it. The country flair, the light piano flair of like the Elton John stuff. I like some Elton John, but I don't love when he does that. I don't love the Twinkle Toes stuff. I don't love the Broadway schmaltzy stuff on this record. That stuff weighs it down. That stuff really weighs it down. But what I do like about this record is the dark, sprawling material, which he really perfected. The stuff on Segnet Committee we talked about, he perfected in Quicksand and Billy Brothers to the point where those, honestly, if those tracks weren't on here, this would be really the bottom of the thing, you know. But wait, those two tracks alone, but there's some great proto glam rockers. I do like Andy Warhol. I do like Queen Bitch. Um, you know, I did listen to this record the most in preparing for that. I listened to it so many times to make sure I felt this way about it, make sure it belonged here. I listened to Christmas Eve's Day blaring off this record copy, and I loved it. There's literally great the Divine Symmetry box I listened to a lot, which I really got re-familiar with some of the workings of this record. But you know, so there's something said about me giving it the old college try here, but then this is where it ranks. Anyway, so my favorite tracks. Number three is Life on Mars, of course. The Mick Rock video, the blue eyeshadow, the greenish blue suit that when I saw in person looked totally different than it does in the video. Actually, I think it's the way that Mick Rock exposed it in the video. That's my karaoke go-to, Life on Mars. Get me on a table, I'll throw up there, I'll get up there with the best Barbara Streisand impression you'll ever hear in your life doing Life on Mars. Greg can attest to this. So Life on Mars is wonderful. Definitely one of his first masterpieces, and I never tire of hearing it. Number two, is Quicksand, which, you know, the dynamics, the spiritual lyrics, the way that Mick Ronson does come in and just, should I kiss the viper's fang? Rips into these really intense bits, but then it goes back to being introspective. And my number one track, Billy Brothers, I don't know what he's saying. It's cryptic, it's surreal, it's frightening, and it really, really moves me. But Hunky Dory still got to sit here, and I'm sorry, everybody at home. Please don't kill me.
So it seems like number 17 is the place of the controversial picks, and mine is coming up next. You know, Frank, you already alluded this, you know, as I mentioned in the beginning with my number 29 pick when I said this is, you know, Tin Machine, the first album is the only one I really never connected with. From 28 down, it's various levels of like to really, really love.
Ooh.
And I love this next record, but I feel like, you know, as we always say, everything has to have a place. And I think by us, you know, mentioning we have to, you know, we give justifications of why these albums appear where they do and mention like weak spots, you know, our weak spots on the records. Um, and that's the fun part of doing these is just how these records hit us and resonate us individually based on our life's experiences when we heard them, what was going on in our lives. Frank and I, we did a psychedelic furs ranking video, just me and him, and I remember that his last place was my number one record, and it's just like so interesting how that kind of stuff does happen. Um, so with that being said, here we go. Here's my number 17 pick. Once again, don't get me wrong, I still love this record, but I'm going with 1977's Heroes. Yes. Um, Beauty and the Beast and Joe the Lion, which are the tracks one and two on this one. I know those incredibly well. I've heard them hundreds of times. But I've come to the realization here in 2025 that I've just never fully embraced them. The title track, which appears as number three, is just so overwhelmingly great and intense that for me, it just obliterates those first two songs. The instrumentals are really grand, especially Moss Garden and V2 Schneider. Um, but here is where it sits at number 17. And let me go down my three picks here. Oops, sorry, pages are sticking together. Number three, The Secret Life of Arabia, the closing track, has such a great bass line on that one. Number two, Sons of the Silent Age. Dang. I mean, his vocal phrasing on that Stand on Platforms, Blank Looks and Notebooks is so great. Lyrically, there's so much imagery. They don't walk, they just glide in and out of life. They never die, they just go to sleep one day. It's so heavy. It was cool. I know Greg talked about seeing Bowie for the first time on the Glass Spider tour for Never Let Me Down, and I seem to remember didn't Peter Frampton have one of those headset microphones on him? And I feel like he sang some of the parts on Sons of the Silent Age on that. I recently got that CD that came out of the Glass Spider tour, and I have to say that I've warmed up to it. I haven't seen the video in a long time, but it was cool hearing some of those renditions of some of those songs. And so Sons of the Silent Age is number two for me. Number one, Heroes, the title track. If this was the only song David Bowie ever wrote, it would still be such a legendary achievement, and he would still be celebrated for that. I soaked up the vibe at Hansa Studios, where this was recorded in Berlin, when I was back there in 2019 and walked around those grounds where I imagine, he observed the couple standing by the wall. It was just great to be in the presence of that. But yeah, number 17 for me, controversial pick, I know, is Heroes.
All right. Number 16 is an album where I feel like of all the albums in Bowie's catalog, it's the one I've had the biggest change of heart on. And that is Let's Dance. And I mean, I was a Bowie fan at the time. I was a young teenage Bowie fan. And I had only gotten into him a couple of years before this. And I hated this album at the time because I felt kind of betrayed and resentful. I was annoyed by his preppy look on the videos, the slick production. I mean, it was the first new Bowie album that came out since I'd become a fan. And it just wasn't what I wanted. I wanted Scary Monsters Part 2. And this instead felt like it was more of a piece with what I considered, the enemy commercial music of the time, like Thriller and Phil Collins, which, some of that I actually really appreciate now. I mean, Thriller was a great album, but at the time I was 17, I didn't want to hear that. I was into post punk and punk rock and everything. And I just I could not appreciate this, but it has really aged well for me to the point where on this re-listen, I finally said to myself, you know what? For the first time, I can say I love this album. I enjoyed it that much. It is commercial, yes, but as Frank noted, it got a really unique production style and vibe that actually really wasn't aping anything else. It doesn't sound like every other 80s record. The use of blues and mixing that with the dance music was really very original. And it does not have the banal kind of like, sort of very trite feel of the following two albums. So I don't even group this anymore in the Phil Collins years. I think it stands on its own as a great album. So yeah, I used to hate it. This play, I loved it. But I have to also say though, I initially when was preparing for this video, I think I overranked it initially due to that swing of being like newly in love with it, and then I had to readjust a little bit. So originally I had it a little bit higher, and then I moved it to where I think it actually belongs at 16. It's easy, to finally come to like an album, and then you place it higher than maybe it deserves. So yeah, I really love this. Just please, whatever you do, don't tell 17-year-old Greg because he'd be mortified. But damn, it's a great album. Three songs I'm gonna pick. Number three, Cat People, which is smoldering, awesome track. I know the a lot of people prefer the earlier version from this film soundtrack, which I remember seeing the movie at the time and thinking was cool. But I actually like this version better. I feel like it burns a little deeper. Number two, the title track. I love the delayed guitar rhythms, the grumpy sax duel, and just the overall spaciousness of the feeling of that song. And yeah, like Frank said, it just makes you want to dance. And then number three, I know I talked some, I really dissed the Iggy covers earlier in this video, but here's one where I'm going to say I think he did an amazing job, which is China Girl. Um, I'm as big or bigger an Iggy fanboy as I am of Bowie, but I have to admit, I think this version might, for me, be actually better than the original on the Idiot. Bowie's vocal performance and the subtleties on it are just superb. I love how Nile Rodgers added that cool intro on the guitar. I just think it's an amazing, amazing version of a song that elevated it even more than the original for me. So yeah, I like you. I really like you now. Let's Dance. Number 16.
Welcome to the club. All right. This is I didn't forget about this record. I bet you all at home thought I did, but it's the highest ranking for it, and it's Tin Machine 2. I love this record way more than either of you, and then probably any more than anybody who's a Bowie fan does. I defend this record. I've liked it since I bought the cassette with the little cutout on the side and the gas station. Basically, this record had so many. It was so the label went out of business. London Victory was like this in this limbo for such a long time that like they couldn't get rid of copy. They couldn't get rid of them. They gave them away for free almost, right? But I love it. I really think it's a cool record. It has a couple dreadful cuts. We've already talked about those. Stateside, I find to be the more the worst of the two. I feel like Stateside, the blues rock cliches, I'm going stateside. I can't really do it. Sorry for me, I have a soft spot for because not only is Hunt Sales really he's pouring his heart out. He definitely was an addict. He definitely had a lot of issues. He was really kind of putting his heart out there, and it does it for me. It does. I don't love it. It's definitely not. I'm not defending it necessarily, but I think it's got its charm. Anyway, on the flip side, though, this record has such incredible tracks. Some of the best '90s work he's done. The highs of it are so good that I can forgive those missteps. And I really struggled where to put this one. I was really, it's actually even jumped several times in the past couple weeks, really. And it just didn't have a home. And I think it gets unfairly maligned for that. I think it has the same travel mindset that Lodger does with Alma Pura. Greg, you already talked about that. Great track. Not even a favorite, but a great track. I think it's just unified and stronger. I think, Greg, you also said that if you combined the best tracks of this off the best tracks of the first, you'd have a solid, awesome album. Totally agree with that. Signed, sealed, delivered. Absolutely. This record does sound like a band working together. The first record did feel like a bit of a, vanity project, or they're just finding their footing and it's very noisy and abrasive. This one is coherent in that way, and I love that about it. Anyway, best tracks though. Shopping for Girls is really bleak. The subject matter of it, written about, Reeves Gabrels going to Thailand with his wife at the time, intense. Intense is a beautiful track though too. It's amazing. It's another one of those Bowie moments where he wrote about something real, and I love that for it. And I love that he went there. He went to a deep, dark place for it and came out with this really beautiful song. Number two for me is, Brett, you already mentioned the extremely underrated Goodbye, Mr. Ed, which I think is great. The way it kind of comes out slow, just kind of hits hard. Love that. And my favorite is You Belong in Rock and Roll. Brett, you mentioned the sax skronks, the dark groove. Reeves Gabrels is playing it made noises like vibrators all over it, which is kind of awesome. And he was really into Pretty Hate Machine at the time, which I think is really heard on that track. You can hear a lot of those industrial scrapings and sound stuff going on there. And it's a great track. I think a real highlight of the '90s Bowie work. Tin Machine 2. Despite what these guys say, give it a shot,
I still really, really like Tin Machine too.
That's fair. That's fair.
I,
Okay.
I wonder if if there's some in the vaults, any versions of them where Bowie is singing "Sorry."
I'll get back to you.
Yes,
Oh,
maybe we'll get a box set with some bonus stuff. All
I
right,
did for Tin Machine, but go
all
on. Yeah.
right. I know this is going to be controversial. Pick number two for me. So here we go. Let's just get it out of the way. Number 16 for me is going to be Scary Monsters. Yes, 1980. It's one of those that 2025 me is, has this realization. Don't get me wrong, still love Scary Monsters. I've heard it countless times. I feel like about half of this album is amazing. Um, but it's no game, both versions. Up the Hill Backwards, Kingdom Come have never been favorites. But the highs on this record are so high, starting with my number three, the title track, Scary Monsters and Super Creeps. High energy, great electric guitar from Robert Fripp. I love the drum fills and that haunting three-note guitar motif that we hear during the chorus. There's this galloping acoustic guitar that's so good. And I love how he really leans into his British accent on, well, I love the little girl. Sorry, everyone, but yeah, that part, I always wait for it. It's a little bit of Richard Butler in there. And second favorite is Ashes to Ashes. Bowie revisits the tale of Major Tom and this beauty, the octave bass part, the call and response vocals, absolutely wonderful. But my absolute favorite on Scary Monsters, which is top tier Bowie, Teenage Wildlife. Always goosebump when it comes on. And especially when it comes around to the David, what shall I do part. They wait for me in the hallways. Don't ask me, I don't know any hallways. Such a jam. But overall, Scary Monsters places at number 16 for me.
All right. For 15, I'm going to go with Earthling, which is a really great album. In fact, as you guys said, all the albums from here on in, I pretty much consider great albums. But it has to go somewhere. I feel like the drum and bass and jungle stylistic affectations on the album, while I don't mind them, I think they're cool. It does make it sound a little more dated than some of the other later albums of his, like Outside and Heathen, which is, I guess, why I'm ranking it a little lower. But it does have a real cool cybernetic flair, and I enjoy the hell out of it. It has aged better, for example, than a similar album from that same year. Like, I think Prodigy's Fat of the Land, which is a great album, but I feel like I like Earthling more now. Um, Talking about Prodigy, while I do dig Little Wonder, I think I always struggle with it all because it's too much like Firestarter for me, and I feel like, oh wait, that's not Firestarter. I want it to be Firestarter. But all in all, it's a really good album. If just a step down from Outside for me. Three songs. Number three, I'm Afraid of Americans. I love the Nine Inch Nails vibe of that. It's cool. It's one of his, more well known songs from that era, and I think it's justified. Number two, the disturbing and memorable Telling Lies. I love that track. And my favorite is 7 Years in Tibet. This wonderful slice of dreamy, esoteric funk. It's a marvelous gem of a track. So I'm going to leave it at that. Number 15, Earthling.
I have every Earthling single too. I love the Earthling singles. They're all great. Those like dance mixes. Anywho, number 15 for me. This is shocking because I hated this record when I first got it, and it was by far my least favorite Bowie record. I had no love for it whatsoever. It's Young Americans from 1975, and the fact that it's placing at 15 for me just goes to show how much I've grown as a music appreciator. I was not ready for it when it came out. I loved doo-wop and soul and disco through my parents' love of car shows, their record collection. I just didn't love this record. I thought Bowie's foray into this territory was a bit disingenuous. It is plastic soul, as he calls it. He obviously was out of his mind when he made it, and there's something to be said about that. But in my defense, when I picked this up in the mid '90s, I was deep into my MTV alt rock phase, really big into Nine Inch Nails, Smashing Pumpkins. I loved all the Earthling Outside stuff that was coming out, so I just didn't get it. But the older I get, the more I find the complete and utter joy in a lot of this record, and still find that it feels fresh because I've listened to it 150 times instead of 1,000 times. So, there's lots of great things about it. You have Ava Cherry, you have Luther Vandross is the first foray with Carlos Alomar, a big important player in Bowie's. Since then, up until some of the records we're talking about in the 2000s and onward, it's the first record with Earl Slick. You have Dennis Davis too. Mike Garson's his last one though, so you're saying goodbye to Mike Garson for a while after this. But this album is just really sexy and smooth, and it's just a damn good listen when the mood strikes. There's the Gouster, which is that version that came out on the most recent box set, Who Can I Be Now? Which is, I think it's got a lot of great things on it. I love the John and Molly Dancing Again track. I love a lot of the tracks that were left off it. Who Can I Be Now? It used to be it used to be me, or not used to be, that's a Cure song. It's Gonna Be Me. Wow. Cool. Those tracks are great, but at the same time, the Gouster leaves off some of my favorite moments, which are Fascination, aka Funky Music, which is Luther Vandross's track, and Win, which we'll talk about in a second. Anyway, so the problem with this record, obviously, I think we're all going to maybe talk about this, is John Lennon's influence. He does that Beatles cover, which I don't mind. I actually don't mind Across the Universe as a cover, but he did it to get John Lennon into the studio, and then they wrote Fame together, and that changed the whole dynamic of the record. And that for sure put it is like the weakest moments on the records for me. It doesn't really fit with the rest of it. The rest of it is this really crystalline soul, and then Fame and Across the Universe are just kind of just rock, kind of like just a little funky rock. Fame I've never really loved. It's definitely mean spirited. It's nasty. It's got that it does have that Lennon spit to it, which I like. I can hear Lennon all over that one. It's got a muscly groove. I like hearing it live. Hearing the Earthling band do it, or the Earthling band do it on all those recorded performances was awesome. And it netted him his first US #1. So you know what? He did the right thing, I guess, to at least record it and release it. Maybe it shouldn't have been on the record, but anyway, so this album was an important shift in his career, and I'm really glad that it's grown on me in such a big way. So with that in mind, my 3 tracks, Fascination, something about women, cocaine, whatever it is, based upon Luther Vandross's funky music. Love it. Always have. Even when I didn't like this record, loved Fascination. Number 2 is Right, Slinky Grooves, about a little something dirty there if you look into it. And number 1 track for this is Win, Those Clouds of Saxophone by David Sanborn. A really strong vocal performance. He's really strong and soulful, but he's also thin, and you can hear the strain, but it's beautiful in that way. It's such an underrated track in this catalog. And if you haven't heard Win, just put on some headphones, turn the lights down, and play that song on loop for a little while. So that's what I have to say about Young Americans. I'm really glad I like it now.
Right. Number 15 for me, which is the highest place that this album is going to have in our list, and that's 1983's Let's Dance. You know, I grew up on 1980s MTV and Let's Dance, Modern Love, China Girl, those music videos. Uh, it's, you know, you guys have already talked about it. It was a huge album for him. It brought him to stadium tours and massive, massive success. Um, Shake It, one of the is really what brings this album down. It's probably one of the, in my opinion, one of the weakest tracks in Bowie's catalog. But you know, but then you know, your Modern Love, China Girl, Cat People, all, I mean, all great stuff. Like Greg already talked about China Girl. I love the Iggy Pop, the rawness of the Iggy Pop's version where the vocals are so overwhelmingly like loud and they distort the speakers. That part has always just been so great. Three favorites though. Number three, I'm going to go with Without You, which no one has talked about, which I think is a beautiful little song. Number two, I'm going to go with Criminal World. Great vocal performance on that one. And number one, title track, Let's Dance. Frank, you talked about it. You know, I mentioned about DJing at my brother's weddings and playing the wedding song. Well, Let's Dance guaranteed was the first song that I played once all the ceremonial stuff was over and it came time for the reception. Guaranteed that I hit Let's Dance on to get people out of their seats, probably followed by Love Shack, because those are, of course, wedding songs, right? So, anyways, number 15 for me is 1983's Let's Dance.
For number 14, I'm going to piggyback on you, Frank, with Young Americans. You know, I actually, you know, I grew up as a kid in the 70s and listening to AM radio, and I loved even then 70s soul and that Philly sound with the strings. All those singles from that mid 70s period, I loved them as a kid. So listening to this album, it just feels good to me whenever I put it on, though not all the material is really top tier. I think that's the issue with it. I do like how Carlos Alomar added a lot of funkiness to Bowie's sound, exemplified on, you know, a song like Right, which is super suave. But as Frank alluded to, I feel like the flaw of the album is that the concept of this soul album and then the addition of the Lennon material, it doesn't really quite work for me. You know, it's to its detriment, I think, a little bit. I mean, I do love Fame. I actually do love it. I think, like many kids my age, that was probably the first song by Bowie I ever heard. Because, like you said, Frank, it was a number one. That was a song that was just like inescapable back in summer 1975 or whenever it was. And you know, it's a great song. It's space cocaine funk, whatever you want to call it. But on the other hand, you have Across the Universe, which I know you liked it. Frank. I think it's a simply terrible cover version of it. I love the original version. I think it really sinks the album. And I feel like they those two songs seem shoehorned onto the album. And I feel like I would have preferred if he had put those two songs out as their own thing, you know, as a non-album single back to back, and let that be its own, you know, John and David thing. And then on the other hand, you know, put back maybe some of the songs that were cut out from the Gouster, like as Frank said, like Who Can I Be Now and It's Gonna Be Me. I feel like it would have worked as a more coherent sonic statement. So that's probably why I'm ranking it lower than most of his other 70s albums, just because I feel like, though I love it, and whenever I put it on, I love hearing it, but it does have those flaws. Three tracks. Number three, Fame. Like I said, always liked it from the first time I heard it as a 10-year-old. Number two, Young Americans, one of the classic Bowie 70s singles with a bravura vocal performance. Always lives free in my head. And my favorite, going along with you, Frank, is got to be Win, because it's just the luscious and most mysterious thing on the album. It's just like listening to a soulful cloud, and you just want to live in that cloud for as long as you possibly can. So yeah, number 14, Young Americans.
You know, in my defense, I had first heard Across the Universe on Young Americans and hadn't heard the Beatles one till later. So that's probably why I like it. Okay. Well said. I also got to see the Sigma Studio space. I think I sent you guys photos of that. Got this. I think I was staying down the street from it with my partner, and I happened to walk by. I was like, "Hey, wait, the giant sign! This is where Sigma Studios was. Cool, really neat." Anyway, cool. So anyway, so for me, oh, and it's also interesting to note that how so many Bowie records start out as one thing and get knocked off to be another one. We've talked about it a few times already. We're maybe gonna talk about it again. He kind of comes in with something, and then something else just derails him. And obviously that happened with Young Americans. And the cat just bit this one, so I think she'll like this one. My next pick is Men Who Sold the World from 1970, the first record with Tony Visconti really behind the board, and he's playing bass on it. It's the closest Bowie will ever get to making a hard rock record. And to me, it really rips. So almost like She Shook Me Cold and Saving Machine are really violent. They're very Sabbathy. They're intense. There's a lot of T-Rex mysticism. Greg, I'm sure you'll talk a lot about T-Rex on this one, but you talked about Black Country Rock already. Um, that might be Visconti's influence getting Bowie and their rivalry kind of into play here, but it's really cool. I love the apocalyptic feel of this record. To me, what's interesting to me is I think between Space Oddity, if the trajectory went to this, you went Space Oddity, then you went Hunky Dory, then you went Man Who Sold the World, then you went Ziggy. I would actually understand that flow better because there's some really proto glam on this that I feel more so than Hunky Dory. So it's kind of weird. I know they're all recorded kind of in quick scatter shot with each other. They're all within like 6 months, so there's really a lot of evolution happening. But it's almost like interesting to me that I feel like this record fits better with Ziggy and it fits better after Hunky Dory's progression between the folk rock and the glam rock sounds. Anyway, you have a lot of Nietzsche's Übermensch on here. The Bowie's Fear of Madness really starts to come in on this one. Ran deep in his family. I find it's his first real true masterpiece. And it does have a lot of the spiders on it, so it's really great. Anyway, but my favorite tracks on this one. Number 3 is After All, which is a really delightfully unsettling, ghost-ridden, folky track. I love it. I think it's really neat and a lot of mystery on it. Actually, it's not on my top 3, but I just want to give a special shout out to With the Circle's giant, epic sprawl and the way it comes down from the mountain at the end and the way the spiders rip on it. But my second favorite track is Man Who Sold the World, which I love the re-recorded version of it from the 90s era from Outside. I love the version on here with all the the chants and the mysticism. And I love that it really tells a great story. I'm not sick of this track in any way. I think it's really a great early masterpiece of his, and it has staying power. And then my favorite track, which I forgot about, and then kind of always knocks me on my butt, is All the Madmen. And I love the way it kind of develops. It opens up with those flutes and then has that really strange, "You followed me home, mommy. Can I keep him?" Before ripping back in with some Mick Ronson, some tasty licks there. So, Man Who Sold the World, really, really cool record. And I don't love the Metropolis as much, which I know you have there and I just picked up recently. But the original mix of this record is perfect. I love it.
Number 14 for me. I'm also I'm going to go with Young Americans here, 1975. You guys have already talked about this. You've already mentioned some of my points. Fame, I like as a standalone song, like Greg had mentioned. But on the album, it's probably the moment that's the weakest moment for me. Like you, Frank, I don't mind Across the Universe, the cover. I feel like I feel like I heard Bowie's version before hearing the Beatles version. I think at this time period, Bowie's voice had some strain to it. You can hear it kind of on the David Live tour, the recording of that, and that comes through uh, I think on Across the Universe. I think you also hear it on one of the non-album covers. There's another Springsteen cover. It's Hard to Be a Saint in the City that he did. That's on the sound that was included as a bonus or one of the tracks on the Sound and Vision box set that came out before the Ryko albums were reissued, or the albums were reissued on Ryko. But I like Across the Universe. But I'm just going to jump into my 3 favorite tracks. Number 3, Win. You guys have both talked about it. Great. Number 2, Young Americans. That song is such a cool ride. I have that live recording that's up there. That is from the Diamond Dogs tour, and Young Americans makes an appearance on there, and it's so great to hear like an early version of that before it was immortalized on Young Americans. I think it's a great opening track to the album, and that drum fill that leads us in is just so distinct, and you know exactly what it is. But my number one favorite track on this, which will always be my number one favorite track, is Fascination.
which he does an excellent acoustic guitar cover of. If you
Thank
haven't
you.
heard it on one of his streams, chef's kiss.
Thank you, Frank. So number 14, 1975's Young Americans.
All right, moving on to 13. I am going with Heathen from 2002. Tony Visconti returns to produce, and everything feels kind of revitalized after hours. Bowie himself called it a cousin to Low. I can kind of see that. I feel like his vocals are much stronger here than on Hours. It's definitely, for me, if you look at his career, like those last 20 years of his career, I feel like it's one of the top two or three albums of that period. It's really an excellent record. Uh, as someone who grew up watching the Uncle Floyd show as a teenager, I really appreciated his tribute on the beautiful Slip Away. And I think Cactus, originally by the Pixies, is one of his better later covers. Though neither of those makes my top three, but I thought they were really standouts in a way. I feel like the album really holds together as a work of art, and that's what I appreciate the most about it. As far as my three tracks, I'm gonna go with at number three, the title track "Heathen the Rays." Great song with, as typical for Bowie sometimes, uplifting music and bleak lyrics, but it's a killer track. Number two, the Neil Young cover "I've Been Waiting for You," which I sometimes have been like a little hard on some of his covers, but I think that's a really good one. It really cooks, really simmers, and it's one of his later hard rocking songs that really kicks ass. I love it. And my favorite by far is the song "Afraid," which is really stirring, and I think, like the album itself, it's one of the best songs he wrote in that last era of his career. So yeah, number 13, Heathen.
Greg, have you heard the toy version?
Yes.
It's so good. Yeah, cool. All right, number 13 for me is 1979's Lodger. It's a broken record, and for that, I love it. I really didn't like this one either when I first got it. I couldn't connect with it. I found the production very muddy. I think it's a challenging record. What I went to go run and go get was my deck of Oblique Strategies, the Brian Eno card deck that was notoriously used to art prank half the members on this band, to switch instruments, change things, mix it up, do really weird stuff on this album. But it really alienated the band. I think Bowie was exhausted. Apparently Visconti said his heart wasn't in it. But I really have grown to love it. I've really grown to appreciate, as a fan of broken music and dissonant music, grown to really love it over the years. He moved away from Gloss and really did some really challenging stuff. I mean, I know Berlin was challenging for him in general, but this is the one where he really just was like trying lots of weird different things. And he seems like he's singing badly in spots. Brian Eno's making a lot of cricket menace, as he calls it, on the sleeve, credited for a lot of bizarre stuff on it. There's definitely some reggae influence in this one, everybody. We talked about that on tonight. There's definitely some Middle Eastern reggae, like Yeah Assassin's got a bit of both of those kind of flavors. There's definitely critiques of Western civilization all over this record. It's really interesting, though. And the more I listen to it, the more I love it. The more it grows, the more it feels like an old sweater. It's got a little must in it. And to that, I think it's really cool. There's real barn burners on it too. You have Boys Keep Swinging. There's one where they switched instruments. I think Carlos Alomar drummed, or someone, or one of, not the drummer, not Dennis Davis. Either was George or Carlos drummed on that, and then it somehow became a great glam throwback to glam. It has the video with the sexual ambiguity with the wigs and the lipstick smears. Really iconic. But it also takes on toxic masculinity, which I really appreciate. DJ is it's kind of a horror story to me. Everything is a celebratory track. As a DJ, as someone who has to do stuff day in, day out and really please the masses, I find that this, from an actual DJ's perspective, or a reference to David Jones and David Bowie's work ethic over the years, is kind of horrific. And I love that about it. You can see it in the video where he's just kind of walking through and getting kissed and he's just like really dejected, and he rips the blinds down. What I do want to say is I actually have 3 copies of this album on vinyl. So I have this one, I have the Ryko edition, which we'll talk about, and I bought a standalone copy of the 2017 mix that came in one of the box sets, and I do think that improves on a lot of the muddy stuff. Um, but there's a lot of cool sounds on this. There's a lot of stuff that Brian Eno is doing that sounds like a dry run from My Life in the Bush of Ghosts or a way to a Talking Heads, including Adrian Belew's work. Bowie's very recycling himself at this point, the fear of becoming an influence. He reused Red Money, which is the weakest spot in this record for me is Red Money, which is a redo of Sister Midnight, which is his best track with Iggy Pop, in my opinion. That kicks off The Idiot. Greg has it pictured there. I love Sister Midnight, and I think Red Money was a really weird choice. Anyway, so favorite tracks though. I've talked a lot about Lodger. Sorry, everybody. Number 3 is Fantastic Voyage. The great vocal performance out of it. It's a generally angry lyric, really well, masterfully played out. Great way to kick off this record. Number 2 is Red Sails. Very noy there. The motoric beats there. Really the hinterland, fa 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 fa. It's really intense. And then Look Back in Anger to me is with the big dramatic guitars and a swinging and disjointed rhythm is my favorite track on here. And I love that there's a rhythm guitar solo instead of a lead. If you listen to it, it's this Carlos Alomar, and that's the solo. And he takes a rhythm solo, and I've never heard that in my life. Lodger, such a cool album. Again, like Young Americans, glad I like it, man.
You just made me think of something, Frank. When the three of us did the Bauhaus ranking, we talked about the Go Away White album, and there's the one song on there where Daniel Ash does a rhythm solo, and you hear Peter Murphy in the background. The solo goes here or something, and then Daniel Ash is playing those little scratchy rhythms, and he's like, "This is the solo. Oh, it's good." I love that part. It just made me think of that. Yeah.
I forget about that record a lot, so thanks for the reminder.
Number 13 for me, I'm going to go with The Man Who Sold the World from 1970. Bowie's the album in Bowie's catalog that has the most front cover variations. I think there might be 4 different versions. I know there's that one, there's this one, there's the dress, there's that other one that has like the earth, and is there an eagle on it or something? It's like red. I think that was the German edition, I think, if I'm incorrect. Someone will mention it. Anyways, first time we get Mick Ronson, as Frank mentioned, but we also get Woody Woodmansey on drums, so we're getting 2/3 of the Spiders from Mars. Tony Visconti plays bass on it. I've always loved the sound, the bass tone on this record. It's really warm and it's very 1970s. The bass parts are really up front and prominent in the mix. 3 favorites: the title track, "The Man Who Sold the World," which has already been discussed, which is great. My second favorite is the Superman, those timpani drums, doom, doo, doo, doom, doo, doo, doom. Also excellent. And my number 1 favorite is All the Madmen. Number 13 for me, "The Man Who Sold the World."
All right. Moving on to number 12. I am going with Station to Station. I know this is a favorite of a lot of people. I always struggled a bit with this album. And it always felt a little bit too ponderous and overwrought in places to me, but I've really, really warmed up to it, to the point where I listen to it now and I just enjoy it start to finish. But it's not my favorite of that era. I feel like the title track, it's this interesting, icy, craftworky behemoth. It's really cool, but it plods a little bit too much for me to like fully embrace and say I love it. I used to not really love TVC15, but now I think it's really fun song. Um, Again, I used to not really like Word on a Wing. I think I joked to Frank once that I felt like it was music from a German musical. But I enjoy it more now. I can really see how much this album influenced post-punk in general. Particular bands like Ultravox, Gary Newman, Magazine, that whole end of post-punk. And I can appreciate that as a musician and a music history buff. And I really like it now, but I guess I just don't love it as much as some of the other 70s records. As far as 3 songs, I'm going to go with number 3, Wild as the Wind. It's silky and elegant. I really like the wistful, glistening guitar on that track. Number 2, another classic Bowie single, Golden Years. I love how arch it is. And my favorite and one of my favorite Bowie songs, period, is Stay, which, what a groove. It's probably my favorite of all of his, quote, plastic soul era funky tunes. I love this song so much that I wish Stay was the 10-minute long song of the album, because the jam, I just never want it to end. I want to keep hearing it. But as we said, everything's got to go somewhere. So at number 12, Station to Station.
And as you say, everything goes somewhere. And for number 12, that's where I'm putting Ziggy Stardust. And you're on again. That's where it goes. Yeah, boo. Go ahead. Go ahead. Bring it on.
Crying.
Bring it. I mean, um, I always feel this record might have lost its luster over its time, but every time I do put it on, it does kick my ass. So putting it at 12 feels like a disservice, right? It's the record that broke him. It's the most treasured record. It's the one everybody talks about, and then some. But that's sometimes why. That's why I have to put it here because I feel like I'm just tired of it in that way. I feel like it was never my record in that way. It was never my come to Jesus with him. It was never my the way I fell in love with him. So to me, I didn't have that magic with it. But I do think it's wonderful. What I do think about it that's interesting is that it's a concept record, and like we've talked about already, like I mentioned, the concept hangs by a thread. I think there was maybe a big idea for him to do a lot of remakes on this record and covers around and around, Holy Holy, these tracks that he was like redoing uncovering that were going to make the premises, but then he ditched it for some things that maybe fit the concept and then some other things that didn't. And then it's kind of a hodgepodge in that way. But really, it's all here on paper. All the main man songwriting, the hand clapping, all this stuff. It's the potency of the band. The Spiders really do kick ass. They really do. And it does stand as a tremendous 70s rock record. And it does deserve to be played at maximum volume, like they say. It does. I guess I just wish people talked about any other record in this catalog the way that people talk about the Ziggy Stardust. To that end, though, not on my favorites list, but I do want to give big love to Soul Love, which is such a wonderful track. Heavenly, and another one of those Mick Ronson ripper coming out of a beautiful part to rip in hard. And I want to give love to Hang On to Yourself. It is a really great shambling rock and roll tune that, proto-punk, Starman, all iconic stuff. But my three favorite tracks. Okay, so we have Moon Age Daydream, the best guitar solo of all time. Really is the iconic glam rock track, in my opinion. If you want to hear one track to sum up the entire glam, you have Moon Age Daydream. Number two is Rock and Roll Suicide, which really brings the house down. It closes the record. It's the perfect way to end this album. Give Me Your Hands, reaching through and touching you. Really, maybe that's why I connected to everybody then. It really was something that, without all the distractions of the modern era, people really felt connected to that moment. And then my all-time favorite track on this record, and one of my favorite Bowie songs ever, though, is 5 Years. The way it kind of pulls at you, pulls the heartstrings and opens, and the drum beats and the way the lyrics and the storytelling on it. And it's a really powerful mood setter and a really wonderful song. So sorry, everybody. I hate to put it at number 12, but Ziggy Stardust.
All right, Frank. So this is an album that more people should talk about in a positive way. And we're going all the way back to 1967, which appeared at the very bottom of both of your lists. I think it ranked slightly higher for Greg. Maybe it was your 28. I don't remember. But anyways, David Bowie's debut album from 1967. As we already discussed, we're not taking others' opinions in our rankings or critical opinions of these. It's personal. This wasn't an easy album to find back when I originally found my CD copy. I remember, these are these things that stick with you forever. My back years and years and years ago, my brother and I went out on Christmas Eve day to get some last minute Christmas presents. And we, of course, ended up at a record store because that's what we're going to do. And miraculously, we found a CD copy of that day. So I always relate to this to kind of a Christmas season music listening. I absolutely love this record, and it's quirky. It's unlike anything else that came after, but it's an album that my brother and I have always had in common of Bowie records that we have always loved. Um, doing this list and all this listening to prepare for this during, Bowie's birthday. This was just a yearly thing for me. And I remember, 30 years ago, my brother and I would sit there in the living room and we would listen to chronologically all the Bowie albums that were released up until that point. And this would always kick things off Three favorites, Silly Boy Blue, which I love. Number two, When I Live My Dream. But my absolute favorite song on this album, which will never change, is There Is a Happy Land. It is just the sound of youth. It just makes me, feel like being a kid in Chicago and playing out in the street until the street lights came on and you waited for your dad's whistle to know that it was time to come home for dinner. And that song just brings me right back home. So number 12 for me is David Bowie's debut from 1967.
All right, for 11, I am going with Outside from 1995. Thinking back to when this came out after hating the Phil Collins Years albums and at the time not really digging Black Tie, this album was a revelation to me. It was like, whoa, the Bowie I used to love is back. This is so cool. Um, I felt then and now that it kind of recalls Scary Monsters a little musically. I love the conceptual framework. It is such an absolutely immersive listen with all the interludes. I love the thematic storyline, which calls back a little bit to Diamond Dogs. And I really appreciate that this album really seems to fit for me with the what I would consider the zeitgeist of that time period, alongside things like Twin Peaks, The X Files, Nine Inch Nails. There was a whole hard to describe milieu of things like that that were really prominent in the subculture in the mid '90s, and I feel like this album just taps into that in such a beautiful way. I really liked it at the time, and I love it even more now. It's aged super well, still just as immersive a listen. Three tracks. Number three, the title song "Outside," which is classic Bowie. Number two, The Heart's Filthy Lesson. I love that inimitable Mike Garson piano flavor. And my favorite track is the claustrophobic No Control. One of my faves from the later Bowie years. So, number 11, Outside.
Great choice. All right. Number 11 for me is Ziggy's sister record, Aladdin Sane. Ziggy Goes to America sounds it's more focused, it's brighter, it's tighter, it's meaner, it's nastier, it's sleazier. I love it. There's a few songs on here that I don't love. So interestingly though, I think I like Ziggy better overall as a record, but the strengths in this one versus the blights, like I don't love Gene Genie. I think it's kind of generic blues rock, but I do love almost everything else in this record a whole lot. There's some really schizophrenic stuff. This is Mike Garson's first outing on a Bowie record, performing that legendary player piano solo at the end of the title track. Wonderful. I never tire of how masterful that is. The songwriting here is so top notch. I love the sweet and sinister vibe of Drive-In Saturday, which is a doo-wop song about the apocalypse. It's about how people forgot how to reproduce and the world's over, and they watch old movies to figure out how to do it, so to speak. Love that about it. I love Cracked Actor, so sleazy and raunchy, the harmonica all over it. My band Funeral Crashers back in the mid 2000s covered it. We were playing a strip club and we played upstairs from that, and we had to cover Cracked Actor. We fumbled through it, but that's kind of how you're going to fumble through that one. You kind of got to do it. Um, Everything in between this, I really love Time. I really love a lot of it. Anyway, best three tracks for me. Lady Grinning Soul for me is a long lost Bond theme. Everyone's dressed to the nines and singing their heart out it's like singing on an old piano. Love it. Beautiful. Second favorite track is Panic in Detroit, which is inspired by Iggy Pop's memories of the Detroit riots. Really kind of a terrifying song, re-recorded in the Scary Monsters era, but really the better version is on Aladdin Sane. And my favorite track is the title track, which I talked about. The frail, elegant, jazzy take on that. There you have it.
Excellent. Number 11, and this is going to close out part one of this video. We will be returning with part two with our top 10 list, but I'm gonna close us out here with my number 11 pick, the first appearance of this album on anyone's list so far, 2016's Blackstar. Um, Whenever I put this record on, it is like walking into a house or an old building that has ghosts. It's a fantastic album with a great band, but I reserve listening to this album these days for special occasions, such as preparing for this video. It's such an emotional record, and of course, it's the closing chapter of Bowie's career and life. Uh, Three favorite songs on this one. Sue, which is fantastic. There was a 10-inch single with an early version of that. Um, and Tis a Pity She Was a Whore was on the B-side of that one that was released in 2014. I think Frank's grabbing it right now. And I prefer the album's jazzy experimentation to the advanced single version. Blackstar, there it is. Thanks, Frank. Blackstar, the title track is just so lyrically heavy. But my number one favorite song on this one, I don't think this will ever change, is the closing track, the swan song, I Can't Give Everything Away. Final song from the final album with a very fitting title. That subtle harmonica, which makes me always think of A New Career in a New Town from Low, that uh, beautiful instrumental. Um, but yeah, number 11, Black Star. All right, everyone, thank you for watching so far. Be sure to check out this video's description for the link for part two. We'll be running down number 10 through number 1, along with our 10 favorite non-album tracks. We will see you in the next video. Thank you.